Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it. Our book today is Midnight in Chernobyl, The Untold Story of the World's Greatest Nuclear Disaster by Adam Higginbotham. This is from the prologue. Saturday, April 26, 1986, 4:16 p.m., Chernobyl Atomic Energy Station, Ukraine. Senior Lieutenant Alexander Logachev loved radiation the way other men love their wives. Tall and good-looking, 26 years old, with close-cropped dark hair and ice-blue eyes, Logachev had joined the Soviet Army when he was still a boy. They had trained him well. The instructors from the military academy outside Moscow taught him with lethal poisons and unshielded radiation. He traveled to the testing grounds of Semipalatinsk in Kazakhstan and to the desolate East Urals trace, where the fallout from a clandestine radioactive accident still poisoned the landscape. Eventually, Logachev's training took him even to the remote and forbidden islands of Novaya Zemlya, high in the Arctic Circle, and ground zero for the detonation of the terrible Tsar Bomba, the largest thermonuclear device in history. Now, as the lead radiation reconnaissance officer of the 427th Red Banner Mechanized Regiment of the Kiev District Civil Defense Force, Logachev knew how to protect himself and his 3-man crew from nerve agents, biological weapons, gamma rays, and hot particles, by doing their work just as the textbooks dictated, by trusting his dosimetry equipment, and, when necessary, reaching for the nuclear, bacterial, and chemical warfare medical kits stored in the cockpit of their armored car. But he also believed that the best protection was psychological. These men who allowed themselves to fear radiation were most at risk. But those who came to love and appreciate its spectral presence, to understand its caprices, could endure even the most intense gamma bombardment and emerge as healthy as before. As he sped through the suburbs of Kiev that morning at the head of a column of more than 30 vehicles summoned to an emergency at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, Logachev had every reason to feel confident. The spring air blowing through the hatches of his armored scout car carried the smell of the trees and the freshly cut grass. His men, gathered on the parade ground just the night before for their monthly inspection, were drilled and ready. At his feet, a battery of radiological detection instruments, including a newly installed electronic device twice as sensitive as the old model, murmured softly, revealing nothing unusual in the atmosphere around them. But as they finally approached the plant later that morning, it became clear that something extraordinary had happened. The alarm on the irradiation dosimeter first sounded as they passed the concrete signpost marking the perimeter of the power station grounds, and the lieutenant gave orders to stop the vehicle and log their findings. 51 roentgens per hour. If they waited here just 60 minutes, they would all absorb the maximum dose of radiation permitted Soviet troops during wartime. They drove on, following the line of high-voltage transmission towers that marched toward the horizon in the direction of the power plant. Their readings climbed still further before falling again. Then, as the armored car rumbled along the concrete bank of the station's cooling canal, the outline of the fourth unit of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant finally became visible, and Logachev and his crew gazed at it in silence. The roof of the 20-story building had been torn open, its other upper levels blackened and collapsed into heaps of rubble. They could see shattered panels of ferroconcrete, tumbled blocks of graphite, and here and there the glittering metal casings of fuel assemblies from the core of a nuclear reactor. A cloud of steam drifted from the wreckage into the sunlit sky. Yet they had orders to conduct a full reconnaissance of the plant. Their armored car crawled counterclockwise around the complex at 10 kilometers an hour. Sergeant Vlaskin called out the radiation readings from the new instruments, and Logashov scribbled them down on a map, hand-drawn on a sheet of parchment paper in ballpoint pen and colored marker. 1 röntgen per hour, then 2, then 3. They turned left and the figures began to rise quickly. 10, 30, 50, 100. 250 röntgens an hour, the sergeant shouted, his eyes widening. Comrade Lieutenant, he began, and pointed at the radiometer. Logashev looked down at the digital readout and felt his scalp prickle with terror. 2,080 röntgens an hour, an impossible number. Logashev struggled to remain calm and remember the textbook, to conquer his fear. But his training failed him, and the lieutenant heard himself screaming in panic at the driver, petrified that the vehicle would stall. Why are you going this way, you son of a bee? Are you out of your effing mind? If this thing dies, we'll all be corpses in 15 minutes. Part 1, Chapter 1, The Soviet Prometheus. At the slow beat of approaching rotor blades, black birds rose into the sky, scattering over the frozen meadows and the pearly knots of creeks and ponds lacing the Pripyat River basin. Far below, standing knee-deep in snow, his breath lingering in heavy clouds, Viktor Brukhanov awaited the arrival of the nomenklatura from Moscow. When the helicopter touched down, the delegation of ministers and Communist Party officials trudged together over the icy field. The savage cold gnawed at their heavy woolen coats and nipped beneath their tall fur hats. The head of the Ministry of Energy and Electrification of the USSR and senior party bosses from the Soviet Socialist Republic of Ukraine joined Brukhanov at the spot where their audacious new project was to begin. Just 34 years old, clever and ambitious, a dedicated party man, Brukhanov had come to western Ukraine with orders to begin building what would become the greatest nuclear power station on Earth. Midnight at Chernobyl.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And happy Tuesday, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. A very strange message. Well, actually, it's not a strange message. It's just, I guess it makes perfect sense. I've gotten 4 or 5 variations on this in Twitter, over on Facebook, and I even got one in email. This guy writes, so why won't Pelosi and Schumer simply pass legislation to reopen the government? And apparently, the people who keep asking this, and you know, with increasing frequency, don't know that Pelosi and Schumer have already passed legislation to open the government. You know, it passed the United States Senate back in December. It passed the U.S. House just a few weeks ago. The Democrats are doing everything they can to open the government. It is Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell who are keeping it shut down. Which raises the question, why? Now, and in fact, I'd like to put this to you. Why do you think that this is going on? Here's a couple of possibilities. Last night, Rachel Maddow floated the idea that it's all about shutting down and destroying the FBI. The FBI opened an investigation of Donald Trump in the first weeks of his presidency. And perhaps even a few weeks before that, but right around the time of the election, the FBI opened an active investigation into whether Donald Trump was either wittingly or unwittingly an agent of a foreign government. Now that's pretty serious stuff. And that provoked things like, you know, right-wing talk show host Howie Carr out of Boston. He's writing this for the Boston Herald. This is like, you know, a major newspaper, a nationally syndicated or regionally syndicated talk show host who has a very substantial audience. When Louise and I lived in New Hampshire, I used to listen to Howie Carr on the radio. You know, he's good at what he does. But here's the piece that he wrote for the Boston Herald. He says, the opening sentence, it's time to abolish the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He writes, the G-men have degenerated into nothing more than a racketeering enterprise of Banana Republic-style criminal conspiracy of vast proportions. Now we know that the FBI was plotting a coup against President-elect Trump. And then he asks right up front, he says, we've eradicated earlier threats, the Communist Party and La Cosa Nostra Is the current police state incarnation of the FBI any less sinister than either of those two mobs? He says abolishing the FBI may sound like a radical solution, but they've metastasized into a clear and present danger to the Republic. Well, apparently they've turned into a clear and present danger to, you know, a grifter, con man, front man for oligarchs around the world in the Russian mob, the guy in the White House. So much so that over at Fox News, Andrew Napolitano, the Fox News senior judicial analyst, this is from Ken Meyer over at Mediaite, said the FBI has been caught in a plan to undermine President Donald Trump. Napolitano joined Fox and Friends on Tuesday, it'll be today, this morning, to talk about how FISA warrants factored into the FBI's investigation. Basically saying that, you know, they're inappropriately using FISA warrants to get information on Donald Trump, and then Trump tweets it. This was just, you know, a few minutes ago, right? Maybe an hour or so ago. Donald Trump tweets, FBI top lawyer confirms unusual steps, which is illegal. That has corrupted them. That has enabled them to gather evidence by unconstitutional means. That's what they did to the president, quoting Judge Napolitano in a tweet. Rachel's position was that, and you know, you can't dispute this, that if you want to destroy the FBI, there's two ways to do it. Very easy, very straightforward ways that Donald Trump is seeking to destroy the FBI. The first is just destroy their morale. In fact, since you don't believe in government, since you believe that the billionaires and the big corporations should handle everything, right? They should be responsible for Social Security. They should be responsible for Medicare. They should be responsible for Medicaid. They should be responsible for all our social welfare programs, at least those that we haven't handed off to churches. You know, it's a twofer. Not only do you take down the FBI, but you take down the entire government. So number one. And number two, if you work for the FBI, you've got to have a security check. And the security checks get updated every year or two. And these background checks, and one of the things that they look at, one of the things that can destroy your security clearance is if you are financially insecure. Because that makes you vulnerable to things like bribes or corruption. And as Rachel pointed out last night, she said one easy peasy way to screw up the FBI would be to start taking away paychecks from all those people all at once. And not just the FBI, the other intelligence agencies as well. She says, with that one genius move, you can break the family finances of basically every single law enforcement national security agent in the country. In that one fell swoop with this just one neat trick, you screw up all of their careers. You create security clearance problems for all of them all at once by putting them all under financial strain. Meanwhile, the other thing about this, Ross Barkan over at The Guardian writing, Mitch McConnell has now twice blocked Democratic bills to reopen the federal government. And he says it's striking how little Trump and the Senate Republican majority care. And I would say it's not that the Republicans don't care about what's happening to 800,000 Americans and frankly, millions of Americans, because, you know, when government workers aren't going to work and they're not getting paid, you know, the restaurants in the neighborhood that serve them lunch go out of business or have a crisis. Marriott says that their business is down 25% in Washington, D.C., et cetera, right? You get all this. So you've got, you know, people like Paul Ryan, who called Social Security a Ponzi scheme. Ronald Reagan talked about starving the beast, and that Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, housing programs, welfare programs should all be radically cut, if not taken off the books altogether. And, you know, in January, when Trump said, you know, well, this shutdown could go on for years, he was basically saying, you know, the federal government doesn't mean anything to me. Ted Cruz said the same thing back in 2013 when he shut down the government over an attempt to destroy Obamacare. I mean, if you really believe that the federal government is illegitimate, if you really believe that the federal government harms liberty in the United States, why wouldn't you want to shut it down? And in fact, over at the National Review, Kevin Williamson just wrote a piece. He says the temporary shutdown of parts of the federal government is a good argument for the permanent shutdown of parts of the federal government. Right, so this is the classic, you know, Reagan fine-tuned this brilliantly. This is the classic Republican strategy break government. This is why they defunded not the amount of money Social Security can pay to people, but the number of Social Security agents who can answer the phone and help you sign up. This is why, they cut hundreds of millions of dollars out in the last budget, the Republicans, out of the Social Security Administration, out of Medicare. So it's harder for you to sign up. It's easier for you to sign up with Medicare Advantage, the private for-profit version of Medicare that, United Healthcare sells. Because they don't have any limits on the number of salespeople they can hire. And your and my Social Security and Medicare tax dollars are going right to United Healthcare and through them to the AARP. So when Americans discover that, the services that they like, the government that they like is not working the way it should, then they lose loyalty. Which brings us to, why are the Republicans, why are they voting to give hundreds of millions of dollars to a mobbed-up Russian oligarch, Oleg Deripaska, but they won't give anything to the 800,000 Americans who are out of work? And ultimately millions. I mean, the guys who voted to help out the oligarch, Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, Mitt Romney, John Cornyn, Richard Burr, Ted Cruz, Ron Johnson, John Thune. I mean, if you want to call any of these guys at 202-224-3121 and just ask them, why is it that you're giving millions of dollars to a Russian oligarch, but you won't even hold a vote on whether or not to fund, whether or not to put Americans back to work? Why do you love the Russian oligarch more than American workers? Senator McConnell, Senator Graham, Senator Romney, Senator Cornyn, Senator Burr, Senator Cruz, Senator Johnson, Senator Thune. Why do you love a Russian oligarch more than you love American workers? And now Donald Trump's wall has gone totally steel, right? Totally steel. Well, it turns out there's only one company that can make that kind of steel. It's a Canadian, it's located in Canada. It's called Evraz. It is owned principally by a guy named Roman Abramovich, whose wife is good friends with Ivanka Trump. He is a Russian national with Israeli citizenship. He owns that steel company. Putin owns part of it. That's located in Canada. That's the only one that can manufacture the specific type of metal beams Trump wants for his wall. If that wall is built, Abramovich's company is going to make up to $30 billion. I mean, keep in mind, this wall probably will cost $70 or $80 billion by the time it's done. His company will get huge. By the way, he owns a yacht. It's called the Eclipse. It's worth it's a $500 million yacht. Donald Trump has vacationed on this yacht. Abramovich applied for residency in Switzerland a couple of years ago. They said, nope, you're engaged in money laundering. And this is all in the public record. Right? A money laundering Israeli citizen, Russian oligarch billionaire owns the steel company that is the only company in North America that can make the kind of steel that Donald Trump has now decided he wants his wall made out of. The guy's wife is good friends with Ivanka Trump. What the hell is going on here? You've got a Republican Party that openly hates the government of the United States. You've got a president who was negotiating with a foreign power and with foreign oligarchs to build, a new hotel or Trump Tower or whatever it is in Russia while he was running for president of the United States. You've got Rudy Giuliani out there trying to desensitize all of us to this, right? Drip, drip, drip. You drop the horrible details and then you walk back from them. And you say, oh, I didn't say that. I didn't mean that. And then, a year later when it comes out as a result of an investigation, what do you say? Well, you say, hey, that's old news. Why are you reporting on that? Bob Mueller says that, Trump was fill in the blank, all the stuff that I just said. Yeah, but we already knew that. Rudy Giuliani told us that a year ago. I mean, what the hell is going on here? Why do you think Trump is shutting down the government?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And not just Trump. Why do you think Mitch McConnell and John Thune and Mitt Romney are voting to shut down the government and give hundreds of millions to a Russian oligarch? And welcome back. So Carol in Manassas, Pennsylvania. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Professor. Well, I saw Rachel's show last night, and it is a good point she made. We know he hates the FBI anyway.
Right.
But we also know he hates the government. And this morning I did some research, and I wrote an article about this on my Facebook page. Mm-hmm. And I think it's not just a twofer that he's up for. I think it's more like a 5-4. Because the facts are this. The wall, the money that he's asking for this wall is $5.7 billion. That wouldn't even be a drop in the bucket at making this wall, because as you said, that wall is going to cost about $70 billion.
Yeah.
And by the time they're through, it'll cost possibly more than that just for the upkeep on the wall.
Right.
But the salient point that I see is it's never been about the wall. He said, first of all, he said it was about a campaign promise. But his campaign promise said that Mexico would pay for the wall. And then he said it was something else and something else. I think he honestly, and the Republicans are with him on this. He wants to do what Reagan and I think Grover Norquist also said, which is we're going to drown the government in a bathtub. And I really think that he's just getting a lot of benefits from this, including the one you said about the Canadian Steel Company. I think that he's looking out for his own interests. He hates the FBI. He hates the government. And also, I think he's a madman myself. I really do. I think the man's very, very, very disturbed. So I just hope and pray that they don't give in, because the $5.7 billion would be a drop in the bucket on that wall.
Yeah.
And what's he going to do? What are they going to do when he asks for, oh, I need $20 billion more now, or I'm going to shut down the government?
Right, or I've decided I want X. You know, he's decided that he wants a new Air Force One or something. You know, and I'm going to shut down the government if I don't get it. I mean, normally there's a legislative process, but there's another fur in this too, Carol, and that is that he gets to say to his racist base, and I'm increasingly convinced that part of the so-called Republican base, the Donald Trump base, has as their principal focus, not a secondary or tertiary focus. It's not about economics. It's not about, a class. It's not about any of that. It's about race. They are all about white supremacy, white privilege, and white privilege not going away. And he gets to say to his racist base, to that 30% of Americans, maybe 50, 60% of white Americans who are deep in their core, fundamentally racist, he gets to say to them, I went to the wall for you guys, no pun intended. I went to the mat for you guys. I fought for you guys.
There's no doubt he's a racist. I mean, that's another benefit. He gets to hurt a lot of people, a lot of them of color, you know?
Right. If we were talking about, Europeans or Canadians, this would not be going down the way it is. And in fact, more people come to the United States from Canada and stay here illegally than come from Mexico over the last 10 years. Exactly.
And also, Tom, why does he insist that he went from, it was a campaign promise, to it's about border security.
Right.
It's been proven by the experts that is not going to make our border more secure, and yet he's insisting on it. So it is not about a wall. It's about his madness. Yeah, among other things. I think it's about his hatred fundamentally of the American ideal, of the American dream. Carol, thank you. Thank you for the call. Fascinating stuff. And we'll get into your thoughts on why Donald Trump would turn his back on his own countrymen and women. Why does he hate this country so much? We'll be back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Frank in St. Joseph, Missouri. It says here you disagree with me, Frank. What have I missed?
Yeah, well, quite a few things, but one thing is that nobody was complaining or wondering about all these people that were losing their jobs when the Obama administration was in, when all these factories are closing, moving out, and everything else.
Are you talking about the Bush recession?
But wait, hold on. I'm talking. You can talk.
Frank, if you want to run the show, get your own damn talk show. But I'm willing to have a conversation with you, but we can interrupt each other. What's your point?
Well, the point is these people are working for the government. Okay, and we're all worried about their paychecks, but these other people that lost their jobs, period, there wasn't going to be any paycheck down the road.
You're talking about when the economy crashed in 2008 under President Bush. Is that right? Do I have that right? Because we had horrible job losses that lasted for about 14, 16 months that started in the middle of 2008. Actually, I think it started in February or March of 2008, all the way through the election. And then after Obama became president in 2009, after he was sworn in January, by February or March, he got that stimulus bill through, almost $1 trillion stimulus bill. And almost immediately, the job losses stopped, and we went into what is now 10 continuous years of economic expansion.
No.
Frank, what am I missing? I'm telling you the truth. You can look it up.
Obama did nothing for this country.
Okay.
He hated this country. He hates.
What's your evidence of that, Frank?
Society in this country.
What is your evidence of that?
What is the evidence?
You got nothing. You got nothing. Frank, give it up. Sean in Stamford, Connecticut. Hey, Sean, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, how's it going?
Good. What's up?
Okay. I want to pick it up on what Carol said a little while ago, that I've had this suspicion for the last 2 weeks now, and maybe there's no evidence to it, but maybe you can help me with this. And I have the suspicion that the shutdown is the end game. It's not the wall. The wall is a ruse.
Yeah. No, I'm beginning to think that in fact they and you know, keep in mind it was Sean Hannity, Rush Limbaugh, and Coulter who told Trump to do this. And these are all people who have been hostile to the idea of government in the United States basically forever. I mean, you know, these people all hate the idea of America the way it was envisioned by Franklin Roosevelt and Jack Kennedy. They love America the way it was envisioned by Warren Harding, you know, or Herbert Hoover. You know, presumably, you know, I don't want to just, you know, like Frank did, just blanket, you know, paint them as saying they hate America. I don't think they hate America. I think
hijacked by, you know, by the likes of Donald Trump, and what can we do about it? And unfortunately, they may not do much.
Yeah, well, I mean, Grover Norquist laid this out back in 2002 on NPR. He told Mara Eliason, I don't want to destroy the American government, the federal government. I simply want to shrink it down to a size where I can drown it in the bathtub. And that's what Donald Trump is doing right now. And he's getting plaudits for it. I mean, there's this op-ed in the National Review. You've got Howie Carr coming out saying, hey, just destroy the FBI. Let's take the federal government apart one piece at a time. I'm increasingly thinking, Sean, that you're absolutely right, and that this is, you know, that the whole border security thing. We know that that's a lie, right? The New York Times has a piece on the front page today that documents how last year, this year, border crossings are at their lowest in like 20, 30 years, something like that. I mean, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, I've
back to 1971, I think. Yeah, back to 71, the lowest since 1971. So there is no crisis on the southern border. So Trump is lying about that. And, you know, pretty much everybody's figuring that out. So I think it's just a shout out to his racist base, the wall part of it. But the shutdown part, this is the libertarian/Republican endgame. Destroy the federal government.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And in the process, for an essentially, you know, criminal mobbed-up president, destroy the intelligence agencies and the investigative arm of government. Our book today is How to Get Rid of a President by David Priess. And this is from the chapter Rejected by the Party, starting on page 12, kind of mid-chapter. Presidents need not be thrown out at the polls on election day to find themselves dislodged from the White House. History shows us that a chief executive's own political allies can remove that incumbent when they perceive him as unpopular or unfit. Refusing to nominate a president for a second term, or better yet, getting the incumbent to realize that he should walk away before it becomes an embarrassing vote at the convention, does bring the party significant pain. But many politicians have calculated that discarding their own party's toxic president by internal action is better than waiting for the voters to do it. This dynamic remained absent for the first half century or so of American politics. George Washington, who didn't represent any formal party, set a precedent by stepping away from re-election after 2 terms. Successor after successor followed suit, keeping the support of their parties until they left office after 8 years. Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, and Jackson lost the next election, both Adamses and Van Buren, or met the Grim Reaper, Harrison. John Tyler, if only in this one respect, was a trendsetter. He began a 6-president cascade of men who failed to appear on their party's ballot in the general election after their first term. One, Zachary Taylor, literally had no choice. Like Harrison, he died in office. The others, by staying alive through their 4-year terms, could have carried their party's banners again on Election Day. Not one did, as national agonizing over slavery and other tensions within each of the major parties made it difficult for any president to build and sustain a governing coalition. Of those 5 chief executives, only James Polk left with a solid reputation and a ledger of successes. He'd told Democrats upon his nomination in 1844, "I shall enter upon the discharge of the high and solemn duties of the office with the settled purpose of not being a candidate for re-election." And he stayed true to his word. It was just as well, only 3 months after what would have been his second inauguration, he died at the age of 53. The 3 presidents who followed Polk, the forgettable series of Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan, shared 3 characteristics. First, historians routinely rank them among the nation's worst presidents. Second, and related to that, they took no responsibility for resolving the national moral failure of slavery. And third, no matter how they had attained office, they, like future presidents Chester Arthur and Lyndon Johnson, found themselves spurned by their own parties. The Whigs had learned in 1840 that a celebrity candidate seemed to have an easier route into the White House than a party regular. So in 1848, they nominated General Zachary Taylor, a recent hero of battlefields in the Mexican-American War. Despite his lack of solid political principles or any apparent passion for the job, just 2 years earlier he'd said with apparent sincerity, "I am not and never shall be an aspirant for that honor," Taylor won the election over Democratic candidate Lewis Cass. In July 1850, he became the second straight Whig general to president who couldn't make it to the next election alive. Vice President Millard Fillmore took his place. Fillmore had risen to prominence in New York's anti-Mason party dedicated to exposing and opposing Freemason fraternal organizations, but switched allegiance to the Whigs in the 1830s. In the first year and a half of the administration, inter-party rivals had manipulated Taylor better than Fillmore did, leaving him little to do but preside over the Senate and stew over his fate in a useless job. But as president, he was prepared to avenge perceived slights. Ahead of their expected dismissal, all the cabinet members whom Fillard had inherited from Taylor offered their resignations, which were quickly accepted by the new president. He asked them to remain in place for 1 month. They agreed to stay for 1 week. Fillmore would proceed to fire more previous political appointees than any of his successors had. More than half of those at the State Department, for example, had to find new jobs. The biggest development during Fillmore's presidency was the Compromise of 1850. This set of bills admitted California to the Union as a free state, allowed the organization of the Utah and New Mexico territories without reference to slavery, resolved both the Texas state boundary and the Lone Star State's remaining debt, abolished the slave trade in the District of Columbia, and reaffirmed the fugitive slave law that required the returning of slaves escaped across state lines. Fillmore signed each bill, believing this package of measures had fixed what he considered an annoying issue that kept getting in the way of his other priorities. The compromise bills delayed a war between the states, but at a cost. They not only perpetuated slavery, but split the Whigs further apart, as most Northerners refused to abide by the fugitive slave law. Congressional elections in November 1850 increased the Democratic opposition's majorities in both the House and the Senate. The rest of the president's term was so bad that the highlight might have been the start of Commodore Matthew Perry's voyage to Japan to open that country to American trade, even though he didn't arrive until Fillmore left office. Not long after rising to become the chief executive, Fillmore declared he wouldn't run again in the 1852 election. He reiterated that in 1851. But the trappings of presidential power and the pleas of his remaining party faithful convinced him to retract that pledge and make a late entry into the field of candidates. He portrayed his about-face as a noble personal sacrifice for the good of the party and the country. And during the spring of that election year, 8 Whig state conventions endorsed him. As delegates gathered for what a leading historian of the era calls the longest, most rancorous, and most debilitating Whig National Convention ever to meet, the first tally had Fillmore in the lead. How to get rid of a president.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. 34 minutes past the hour. Tip of the hat to the person who tweeted this to me. Let me just, Natasha Bertrand and Susan Hatch forwarded it. The website FBIAA, which is the FBI Agents Association .org, has a report that they just issued that about the shutdown and what the shutdown is doing. And they say the shutdown is affecting operations. It's cutting back on crimes against children and sex trafficking, drug and gang crime, counterintelligence and counterterrorism, cybersecurity, healthcare and securities fraud, state and local work, subpoenas. Well, here's a little more detailed. If the FBI and Department of Justice are not funded, the agents will continue to face challenges in carrying out our mission to protect the nation. Some of the specific ways the shutdown affects our agents and operations were highlighted in the FBIAA's petition. 1. Special agents are subject to high security clearances and standards, that include rigorous and routine financial background checks. Missing payments on debts could create delays in securing or renewing security clearances and could even disqualify FBI agents from continuing to serve in some cases. 2, the operations of the FBI require funding. As the shutdown continues, special agents remain at work for the American people without being paid, and FBI leadership is doing all it can to fund FBI operations with increasingly limited resources. This situation is not sustainable. 3, pay uncertainty undermines the FBI's ability to recruit and retain high-caliber professionals. The ongoing financial insecurity caused by the failure to fund the FBI could lead some FBI agents to consider career options that provide more stability for their families. And, they got this whole section, financial security is national security, and it continues from there. John in Midland, Texas. Hey, John, what's up?
Hello, Tom. First of all, I would like to tell Frank, the caller that called earlier, to wake up before it's too late.
Yeah, I suspect that Frank is just a troll. I can't believe anybody's stupid enough to say what he said. I think maybe he had a bet with somebody. He could say that on national radio or something. I don't know what it is. Anyhow, John, I'm sorry.
The reason I called you, asked the question, why is Trump shutting down the government?
Right.
I think he's trying to create chaos in this country so he can declare martial law and just take over the government. There'll be riots in the streets and chaos.
So why is he doing that? Is he doing that to shut down the investigations into his own criminal past, or is he doing that on behalf of the billionaires who think that we shouldn't have a federal government anyway, that we should just turn into a full-blown oligarchy like England was in the 19th century?
I don't know the answer to the question, Tom, because I'm just a blind old man here in Texas. Yeah. But if we declare martial law, there's going to be terrible consequences for this country.
I think you're right, John. I think you're right. John, thank you for the call, and thanks for your contribution to the conversation. Alex in Mount Dora, Florida. Hey, Alex, your thoughts?
Hey, I was just calling to say I consider myself more of a liberal, but I was wondering, I think it's kind of odd that Trump is more concerned with a border wall versus internet censorship by big tech, because I believe in free speech.
Yeah, okay. Alex, I find the whole thing very strange. Chris in Oakland, California. Hey, Chris, thanks for listening to AM 910. What's up?
Tom, I have a theory about what's going on with these Republicans like Cruz and all these ones that voted for this to relieve these sanctions on Deripaska. I think we've reached a point where they know. I think they know that they sense that where their political hedonism has brought them, and I think they know their days are numbered. And I think that I think it's real simple. It's just their cynical bet that they're just going to grab as much as they can get, as much power, as much money, whatever they can get. I don't think they care about their legacies. I don't think they care about history. I think they just want to. This is their exit strategy. And what's concerning about this for me, and what it illustrates for me, it kind of dovetails with the point that I think you and Sean were talking about earlier, where with the problem with the cynicism and everything. This is I think speaks to the problem of these guys having access to the special interest money. And they're not, they don't rely on obviously they don't rely on their senatorial salaries. They're more beholden to the millions they get through special interests, and that this diverts their allegiance.
Yeah,
in my opinion.
I think you're absolutely right, Chris. And the whole smash and grab thing, it's sort of like, we back in the 70s when Oakland and Detroit were burning, people said, oh my God, look at this. People are smashing into the stores that, in the blocks that were on fire, they're smashing into the stores, grabbing stuff and running off with it. I would say that, and they condemned that. I would say that what the Republicans in the Senate and the House, frankly, although the Republicans in the House don't have the power right now to do it, but I'd say that what Republicans in the Senate have been doing is the exact same thing. It's a smash and grab operation. They are looting. They are looting our country. Jesse in Miami. Hey, Jesse, what's up?
Hey, hi, Tom. Hey, you're going to be talking about stress from all this inequality and the government shutdown. I would say the government is being shut down because it's too socialist and it's incompatible with the way you make money. But the main question, I want to put it in context, is about the patents. You got a good knowledge of that. And I like to think that patents took away from equality instead of adding to it. When a guy could come up and say, I got this idea, I want it to be mine, nobody else's. Okay, Jesse, you can have the idea, make your money, and nobody else can mess with you.
Yeah.
I think that added to the inequality we have now. But to give it context, sorry I'm talking kind of long, but I try to make it short. The scientists, early scientists and inventors, traded ideas without worrying about somebody stealing somebody's idea.
Right.
Then all of a sudden, some people start making money off it and telling the inventor, you don't have nothing to do with it. And to me, that's what started the patents.
Yeah.
What do you think, adding all of that together?
I think patents, copyrights, and trademarks, these are things referred to typically as monopolies, monopolies granted by the government. That if you're going to do this, like the Constitution says, for the promotion of the useful arts and sciences, then they should be limited. Jefferson thought they should be limited. They should be no more than 3 years. Two of the most prolific inventors in the Revolutionary era were were Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, and they never patented anything. And you can you can today buy bifocal glasses and Franklin stoves that were invented by Ben Franklin. You can buy things that were literally invented by Thomas Jefferson. The idea of these is another vehicle for riches, and which we're going to talk about in the next hour, and with Kate Pickett, who's got an amazing new book out about inequality and how and the impact that it has. And one, you're absolutely right, Jesse, is and this was promoted, extending the trademark protection and copyright protection. This was the effort of the Disney Corporation. They bought a lot of politicians and they got the mouse extended basically forever. And I agree. I don't think it should be. Sam in South Houston, Texas. Hey, Sam, thoughts on the government?
Blue Texas, Beto country.
Okay.
Texas blue bit by bit. Over here, you can actually buy El Salvadorian table cream right at the grocer. That's the change we're making. Used to be you had to go looking for that kind of thing.
Okay.
I've been down in Central America way, and some of those things you didn't used to be able to get. But you know what Salvadorians eat? No joking, Tom. Pupusas. That's
pupusas. Yeah,
you had that?
Yeah, they're corn tortillas with cheese inside them. I've eaten Salvadoran food. What's your point, Sam?
It's thicker. Yeah, it's thicker than a Mexican tortilla. Well, anyhow, you can ask any Salvadorian or any gay frog for that matter. Pupusas and atrazine, that's what's turned Texas blue. But hey, the TS.
Okay, I got it. Dion in Waterford Works, New Jersey. Hey, Dion, what's up?
Hi, Tom. How are you today?
Good. What's on your mind?
Okay. Speaking about Ann Coulter, Rush Limbaugh, and Sean Hannity, right. It was on their... sorry, I have severe stage fright. I'm forgetting what my question was.
No, it's all good. You're saying that these three...
100,000 people who are not getting paid right now be able to file a class action lawsuit against them and 45?
You would hope so, but or think so. That government workers who are basically being screwed by Donald Trump and the Republicans in the United States Senate, that they would have some sort of legal recourse. But there is no right to a job Perhaps they could enforce an employment contract, but I seriously doubt it, because the ability to be employed and to be paid by the federal government is a function of the government being funded. So, Dion, I don't think that there's a legal remedy to this. I think this is going to require a political remedy. Dion, thanks for the call. Great question, though. James in Mineola, Texas. Hey, James, what's up?
I have a question about, you're saying that Trump supporters are racist and all that because of people coming across the border, right?
Well,
so
I'm saying that sure, yeah.
Okay, so what if you're an American black man and you feel the same way? Am I a racist as well? I mean, we have an underclass of people who have already been here for 400 years, who haven't gotten their reparations, but we're so willing to take on everybody else's problems and everybody else's people when you haven't taken care of your minority population.
Yeah, I get it, James, and I know that the Republican Party and the conservatives who fund the right-wing media machine out there are engaged in a multi-million-dollar outreach right now into the black community to say, as they used to say to white people, they used to say to my father when he worked at an all-white tool and die shop, look out for those black people, they want your job. Now they're saying to black people, look out for those Hispanic people, they want your job. And there are some people who are buying it. I think it's a tragedy, but there's some people who are buying it. This is not, I'm not sitting here saying we need to massively increase immigration. That's not what this is about. Joni or Joanne in Dolores, Colorado? Joanne. Hey, Joanne, what's up?
Hey, a while back, thank you, Tom, anyway. A while back, Trump called a meeting with just the Republican senators, or might have been the House.
Right, this was after a bunch of Republican senators came back from Moscow for the 4th of July. Is that what you're talking about?
I believe it was. And he excluded the Democrats.
Right.
And I just thought that was strange, and nobody has mentioned that since. So I'm wondering, what do you think about that?
I think there's all kinds of strange stuff going on, and I think that we need to be exposing this stuff, and it's just this antipathy, this hatred of the American way, of American government within the Republican Party that was embedded fiercely there years ago, back in the 50s, the John Birch Society, funded by people like Fred Koch. This is coming home to roost. Joanne, thanks for the call.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of your calls. Why are Trump and the Republicans keeping the government shut down? Is it just that they hate America? Really? And welcome back. Johnny in Lamarck, Texas. Hey, Johnny, what's up?
Hey, Tom. So let me get this straight. Donald Trump pretends to his base that he cares about America, and he's selling them that it's a social good to reduce the money to and micromanage the FBI. Is that correct?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, well,
actually, it goes beyond that, Johnny.
He's America in this way. Why doesn't he instead dismantle the network of partially privatized fusion centers instead of trying to reduce and neuter the FBI and the U.S. Postal Service?
What's a fusion center?
Fusion centers, they're like a combination of spy, and they share. They're designed to share.
This was the post 9/11 FBI works the CIA stuff.
Law enforcement agencies in real time.
And law enforcement, yeah, okay.
And they also sell information to the private sector for money.
Oh my God, yeah, I don't know, Johnny. What I'm increasingly coming to believe is that the oligarch billionaires who funded Trump and put him into office and the Republican Party hate the federal government. The federal government is the one force that can constrain them. It can tax them. It can regulate their businesses. It can force them to pay decent wages to their employees, things like that. They hate that. And by shutting down the government, Trump is taking a bite out of the ability of government to do those things. And I think that they're applauding him. Terry in Silver Springs, Nevada. Hey, Terry, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Hey, one little remark I thought of was the government shutdown helps remove focus from global warming and the famine that's going to create.
Already is.
We'll eat and we will die.
Yeah, it already is. In parts of the Middle East, you're seeing famine right now. Northern Africa, parts of northern India. I mean, it's in Australia, they just had such a hot day. It was the hottest day in the history of Australia that 30% of the bats of this particular large bat, I remember Louise and I were there on these, and we just see like these flocks of bats at sunset coming out of the caves or coming out of the trees, fruit bats, these giant things, they're the size of a good-sized crow, just, blackening the sky. A third of them died in one day because of the global warming. Yeah, it's so what was your point relative to that, Terry?
When Mueller's investigation is over, who gets to take custody of Trump? The FBI, or what happens there if he gets rid of the FBI?
Well, weirdly, if Trump gets indicted and is supposed to be arrested, that would probably fall to the Department of Justice.
But they don't have a military,
which works for Trump. So, I'm not really sure how that would work or who would do what. And, because we've had crooks in the White House before. Richard Nixon had been mobbed up all the way back to the 1950s. But, he wasn't trying to convert the United States of America into, a massive amount of private wealth for a small number of his oligarchic buddies. He simply took bribes. But Donald Trump is taking the government down and using that. Well, in the case of this vote in the Senate, let's give Deripaska hundreds of millions of dollars and keep the government shut down while we're screwing American workers. It's mind-boggling. Terry, thank you for the call. I'm looking at this going, I never would have imagined, right? I've been hearing this rhetoric from right-wingers literally my entire life. I went to a John Birch Society when I was 13 years old. I have literally been hearing this rhetoric my entire life. I never thought I would see it coming out of the White House. We'll be right back. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you, and Jeff in San Francisco listening to Real Talk 910 Radio. Hey, Jeff, what's up?
Yeah, I'm just curious. I do a lot of driving for my job, and I have the fortunate that I get you from 9 to 12, but then I have to start listening to the noise on the other stations. There's some other things to listen to, but I hear they twist the truth so much on these AM stations because they're not enforcing the fairness doctrine.
Well, the fairness doctrine no longer exists. Obama took it off the books. Reagan stopped enforcing it in '87.
How can we get it back? It
would take an act of Congress.
It would take an act of Congress.
Yeah.
So.
Yep.
And
well, actually, no. It could be done since it's a regulatory rule. It was written by the FCC. It wasn't written by Congress. So it could be put back into place by the FCC, I believe. But the easy way to do it would be an act of Congress. Not easy, but the way that couldn't be challenged or contested or probably wouldn't be struck down by the Supreme Court. But you're right. If you drive across the United States, it's all right-wing hate radio all the time. And in many, you're lucky in San Francisco. You've got a local station. In fact, it's an iHeart radio station. Which is a great station, 910 Real Talk. But most cities don't have anything except right-wing radio, and most cities have 3 or 4 right-wing radio stations because there's an A level, right-wing radio, then there's a B level, and then there's the C level, and then you get down to the old Christian broadcasters like Salem, where you got Hugh Hewitt and these guys, kind of the D level. But there are towns where you got 4, 5, 6 right-wing stations. No progressive stations at all. It's amazing. Jeff, I got to move along, but thanks for the call. Morris in Long Beach, California, listening on KPFK, a great station in Los Angeles. Hey, Morris, what's up?
Professor Clarence Thomas, one of our favorite Chief Justices on the Supreme Court, was addressing the Heritage Foundation. And I got this from a book called Dark Money from a lady named Jane Mayer. Mm-hmm. And what he is saying to the Heritage Foundation, now y'all listen to this now, he is saying, this is Clarence Thomas talking, Mr. Right Wing himself, he's saying, at some point, we have to recognize that we are destroying our institutions. To that I say, no kidding. Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, well said, Morris. And Trump is moving that along. You're absolutely right. Steve in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Steve.
Hey, Tom. This outcome with the man we have sitting in that chair there in Pennsylvania Avenue, this is the culmination of the lazy, derelict, outmoded electoral college and the cancerous Fox News and Murdoch. And, I'm thinking, I'm very afraid with this. I'm thinking this may be correct, that this is the end game, that they really want to get rid of all this stuff. And all these people are so beholden to the Kochs and the dark money. It's terrifying. And frankly, the Republican Party should now be classified as a terrorist organization because none of them are doing anything American that I see whatsoever.
I wonder if the people, the right-wing billionaires who fund Trump and the Republican Party and basically own them both, if those right-wing billionaires have been, keep in mind, David Koch ran for vice president of the United States in 1980 on the Libertarian Party on a platform that included ending Social Security, ending Medicare, ending Medicaid, ending federal unemployment insurance, ending all federal and state support to education, privatize literally everything, including roads, highways, airports, privatize it all, turn everything into an opportunity for a billionaire to make money. That's what David Koch ran for president on. And I believe, from having read his works and his brother Charles's work, that they actually believe this. They actually believe that if Americans really were forced to rely on themselves, we would ultimately just take a deep breath and say, okay, screw it, I'm going to do it. And we'd reach down, grab our bootstraps, pull ourselves up, and go out there and get a good job and work for a billionaire and make America great again, right? I think they believe this. And they believe that things like public education, Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, welfare, housing vouchers, food stamps, they believe that all these things make us lazy. All these things destroy our initiative. And therefore, I believe that what they are essentially saying to Trump, and I think Trump shares this worldview, what they're essentially saying to Trump is, shut it all down, take away the food stamps, take away the Section 8 housing, take away the aid to families with dependent children, take away the health care from the FBI, take all these benefits and things away. And the American people will become self-reliant. You're going to force the American people to become as noble and self-reliant as we are.
Well, I'll tell you, Tom, if that's what they want and that's what they're going to go for and shoot for, you're going to see the stock market go to zero. The whole economy will totally collapse. Most Americans can't sustain, $1,000
expense,
insurance.
Yeah, no, Steve, I think your diagnosis is accurate. Steve, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. We're going to be talking about inequality right after this with one of the leading experts in the world on this. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
from the brand new third edition, the 2018 edition of The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight by me, the subtitle of Fate of the World and What We Can Do Before It's Too Late. This is from the chapter Climate Changes, which I did a huge update on over the last couple of years. Imagine you and your family had a time machine large enough to live in no matter what era you arrived in. Let's imagine that you dial your time machine back to 250 million years ago, when you step out onto a fern-covered field somewhere thousands of miles away from what is today Siberia. Unbeknownst to you, the lava flow has begun in the distance. As you're setting up your new home, you might notice a reddening of the sky at sunrise and sunset, but it wouldn't seem like anything dramatic was going on anywhere in the environment. Over the next few years and decades, you may notice that the weather is growing more intense, the seasonal extremes more noticeable. Still, you'd have no way of knowing that the planet was moving toward a point that would lead to the death of almost everything. Over the years, as you become an old man or woman, your children might notice that the larger plants, what today would be our trees, seem to be dying faster than normal from what appears to be some sort of blight or fungus. It's as if the plant's immune systems have been compromised. Long after you're dead, your grandchildren might begin to notice that the rains are not coming the way they used to, and when they do, the storms are wildly more ferocious. The results are either floods or droughts. Insects and small animal populations are less evident. The air is becoming corrosive. It's getting harder to breathe. The sunrises and sunsets are becoming more spectacular with radiant colors of light cast across the sky. By the time your great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren are born, the lava flows may be settling down, but the tipping point has been passed. Although it was a slow process, it was an inexorable one. The world, over thousands of years, has warmed to the degree where all of the abundant life your descendants could see around themselves was doomed. The lava flow in Siberia, by throwing into the atmosphere a variety of greenhouse gases, had been steadily pushing up the temperature of the Earth. While many of these gases were themselves toxic, it would be their combined greenhouse effects, along with those of the multiplying carbon dioxide levels, that would take down the planet. But you would only know that in retrospect, when pretty much everything was dead. Fast forward to today. The climate scientists' warnings have come true. There is more carbon in the atmosphere trapping heat and moisture than ever before in the 165,000 years of human history. We're on the verge of the first ice-free summer in the Arctic in 3 million years. And back then, the Earth was a much different place from the one currently cradling us, or even the one in which modern humans evolved. The consequences of a warming planet are appearing much faster than had been projected by climate scientists of just a decade ago. The most dire warnings, rising oceans, freak storms, agricultural collapse, they're all taking place now. One recent July afternoon, we had an electrical storm here in central Vermont that was so severe it took out 2 of my computers and blew circuit breakers throughout the house. Our home wasn't unique. Many families lost most or all of their electrical appliances. Larry, a fellow we'd hired to do some repair work on our half-mile long driveway, stood atop a hill with me a week after the storm and told me how his wife had been thrown across the room from an electrical shock she received touching their screen door during the storm. It's not normal weather here, he said. It used to be the Vermont weather was famous for always changing, always unpredictable, but the last few years have been like nothing before. A lot of people agree with Larry. Extreme weather events like the 14-year drought that savaged Australia starting in 1995 and the freezing destruction of Superstorm Sandy are on the rise. Between 2011 and 2013, the U.S. suffered 32 extreme weather events, each wreaking at least $1 billion in damage. 2012, the year of Superstorm Sandy, was the second costliest year on record, with $110 billion in damages. During the 2017 hurricane season, Hurricane Harvey appeared and quickly developed into a 1,000-year event, dumping 20 inches of rain over nearly 29,000 square miles surrounding the Houston metropolitan area, flooding an area the size of New Jersey. Rebuilding from Hurricane Harvey alone could cost up to $180 billion in damages, making it the costliest storm in U.S. history. But how long until the next superstorm? The year 2016 set new records as the hottest year in recorded history, with average global temperatures of 1.3 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. Along with the heat waves, flooding and drought accompanying this temperature increase are melting polar ice caps and in turn rising sea levels. The planet's sea level has risen an average of 8 inches since 1880, with dramatic gains in the last half of the 20th century. In the 50 years since 1963, the ocean rose 2.5 inches in Los Angeles, 6 inches in Boston, and 12.5 inches in Galveston, Texas. The polar ice caps are in an unprecedented state of decline, with sea ice in Antarctica and the Arctic measuring at 1.48 million square miles less than the average 1981 through 2010 average. At the end of 2016, the Arctic saw temperatures 36 degrees Fahrenheit above average. When the mathematics and physics become as compelling as they are now, big business gets alarmed. In November of 2012, the international accounting firm PricewaterhouseCoopers issued a rather dire warning for the future of business on the planet. After all, if the human race has been reduced to living in caves or is extinct, nobody's going to buy or sell anything. In a news release sent out internationally entitled "Businesses as Usual is Not an Option," as current rates of emission reduction point to 2 degrees of warming, Jonathan Grant, Director of Sustainability and Climate Change, said this: "The new reality is a much more challenging future in terms of planning, financing, and predictability. Even doubling our current annual rates of decarbonization globally every year to 2050 would still lead to 6 degrees Celsius, making governments' ambitions to limit warming to 2 degrees appear highly unrealistic." The Last Hours of Ancient Sunlight by Thom Hartmann. You know, here at the Thom Hartmann Program, we're creating basically 3 programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Periodically, we do these deep dive conversations with people who just have made extraordinary contributions to our, public knowledge and dialogue and debate. And, we call this Conversations with Great Minds. We're doing one right now over the next 30 minutes here with Kate Pickett. She is professor of epidemiology, research champion for justice and equality, deputy director of the Center for Future Health at the University of York, the co-author with Richard Wilkinson of several books, including their latest that was just released today, The Inner Level: How More Equal Societies Reduce Stress, Restore Sanity, and Improve Everyone's Well-Being. The website is equalitytrust.org.uk. The Twitter handle, Prof. K.E. Pickett, Pickett. Professor Pickett, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to join you.
It is so great to talk with you. I have been quoting the work that you and Richard Wilkinson have been doing I've been quoting it for years. You've been doing it for years. I've quoted it in my writing. I've quoted it in my books. I've quoted it on radio and TV. I think it's just such important work. Let's start at the beginning. First, let's define inequality. What is inequality? How does it come about in our societies?
Well, what Richard and I have been studying for a long time is income inequality. So that is the gap between the rich and the poor in different societies. And it's not the same in every society. In some countries, the rich are much, much richer than the poor than they are in other countries. We look at income inequality because it's quite easy to get hold of those data. Wealth inequality is obviously important as well. But we think of these as you might think of them as sort of the vertical inequality of society, how steeply the social pyramid is structured, how big the social distances are between those at the bottom and those at the top, and those between everybody on all the different rungs of the ladder as well. So it's a little bit different to thinking about what we might think of as horizontal inequalities like gender inequality, ethnic inequality, religious inequalities, language inequalities, disabilities, etc. These are the vertical inequalities, the structure of society, the distances between us.
So what are the principal consequences of inequality?
How long have you got, Tom? Because
I've read your books.
They are immense and extensive.
Yeah.
There are effects on our health, both physical and mental. There are effects on our relationships, both our intimate relationships and more broadly in society, things like levels of trust and civic participation, levels of violence, etc. There are effects on the environment. There are effects on our economy. There are effects on children's life chances.
Kate,
Very extensive.
Can we pick some of these out, or define some of these, pull them out, and for example, how is the fact that the guy living down the street from me is worth $3 billion, or actually in the case of Phil Knight with Nike, probably worth a hell of a lot more than that, and he does live right down the street, not nearby, but how does and I'm not, I'm not worth millions of dollars. How does that translate into the specifics that you just? How does that translate into higher crime rates? How does that translate into less social cohesion? How does that cause me to be less trusting of my next door neighbor who's not a billionaire?
It's quite simple, really. We are social animals. We have evolved to be extremely sensitive to how other people see us and how we think about ourselves in relationship to other people. Mm-hmm. And so anything that sort of strengthens the grip of class and status anxieties, the grip that they have on us, anything that makes those worse tends to make us feel worse. It's a source of chronic stress. It's a source of feeling devalued or disrespected. And so it's those social links, those sort of psychosocial links, our evolved sensitivity to class and status that mean we suffer much more when those status issues become much more salient and more important.
Back in the 70s, when I was living in Michigan, there was a study that came out of, I think it was done at Michigan State University. I don't have the study. In fact, I've never been able to find it, but I remember vividly hearing this radio story about it out of WKAR, the campus station, and I think it was on NPR. That squirrels build nests out of leaves in trees, and in the winter when the leaves go away, you can see all the squirrels' nests. And so what they did was, and squirrels are territorial. And so what they did was they took a couple, 2 or 3 squirrels' nests in an area that had 10 or 15 of them, and physically went up and added about 20% of more mass, more leaves to their nests, and then just sat back and said, let's see what happens. And what happened was that all the other squirrels, or the majority of the other squirrels in the area, started expanding the size of their nests. And then they were speculating, is this the way that squirrels communicate to each other, that they think a heavy winter is coming, or does this have to do with social status? But isn't that sort of a variation on what you're talking about, that when we see people around us who have bigger homes than we do, it makes us feel an urge to get to there?
Exactly. I think your squirrels are a lovely analogy, actually, and we have evolved, to have very much the same sorts of feelings. But the key thing is that it's not the same in every country, in every state, in every society. In some places, those feelings about how you're doing relative to other people matter more than in other places, and so are a more important cause of ill health or problems of violence or whatever it is. And it's the degree of inequality in those different societies that is driving how much people feel that their relative status matters.
So if the billionaire down the street from me has, $1 billion and thus has this giant compound and has a yacht out in the, in the harbor or whatever, I see that house and I go, oh, gee, I feel diminished by that. But if he suddenly has $10 billion, the Koch brothers, they went from being worth $10 billion a decade ago to being worth $80 billion now. If he's suddenly worth $10 billion, I don't see that much difference, I don't think. He still has that big mansion. How does that increase in inequality cause me, or, the average person, to feel worse about myself and about society? How does that drive up things like STD rates and teenage pregnancy rates and crime and stuff like that?
Because we are all aware of the structure of society, and it might not be that particular person having X amount more $1 billion affects you personally, but the fact that you're living in a society where lots of people are now earning those huge amounts of money and other people have less chance of doing so, and so that changes the game for everybody. So we're all affected by inequality. The rich are affected by it as well, because you might be really literally just down the road from that billionaire but not making quite as much yourself. And so you know that in the eyes of the world, your status is a bit less than that person's status, and so it matters.
Yeah. Our intimate. Let's break out some of these. The social effects of the gap between rich and poor. First of all, you said a minute ago that in some societies, that wealth gap has a greater impact on the average person than in other societies. What accounts for that difference? Is it simply how stark that difference is?
Yes, we think that that's right.
So it's not religion or society or culture.
No,
this is a human thing.
Exactly. This is a very robust body of evidence now. I think you had my co-author on your program probably about 10 years ago when we were first starting to write publicly about these relationships. And since then, the research has really deepened and intensified and broadened. And it's now very clear that these are causal processes. You know, that when the level of inequality changes in some place, then things like levels of child well-being change. And the sort of the pathways from one to the other have been really cleared up a lot. But what I think it would be really good to focus on this afternoon is mental health, actually.
Sure, go for it.
Because, you know, I'm really, in the UK, we are in the middle of a mental health epidemic, and, you know, my sense is that you are in the US as well.
Yes.
You know, I've been looking at some statistics. I see that Gallup says that about 80% of Americans feel stressed every day. 20% live with mental illness, and then there's another survey showing that over half of your young people have a mental health issue. And we've got very similar levels in the UK. And that's a truly astonishing level of distress. And so trying to understand why some countries have this epidemic of mental illness and other places, you know, rich, developed countries in other parts of the world, they don't have that.
Well, isn't the difference between the UK and the US on the one hand, and Germany, France, Finland, Denmark, whatever it may be on the other hand, that those countries never had Reagan or Thatcher. They never had neoliberalism introduced, you know, injected into the bloodstream of their society in a really, really big way that led to an explosion of incredible wealth and an exacerbation of poverty. Doesn't it just come right down to that, 1978 to 1980?
Well, exactly. That's when we saw our levels of income inequality rise dramatically, and they have never yet come down again. You know, there are little ups and downs along the way, but we saw that huge rise with neoliberal ideologies. But I think that the point that we should be thinking about really is that back in the day when Thatcher and Reagan were deciding on their economic policies, they could truly believe that what they were putting in place was going to be for the greater good. They had theories that, you know, trickle-down economics would improve people's lives, that, you know, deregulating everything and freeing up markets would improve everybody's lives. But now we know that that's not true, and we see the evidence that that rise in inequality has actually caused these huge levels of mental distress, physical health problems, the destruction of civic society. So we have evidence in front of us now that can allow us to make different choices, and we're not working in the dark anymore. You know, we've got evidence upon which we can build policy.
Yeah, and that's important stuff, and I want to speak to that in just a moment. We've got to take just a very, very quick break here. We're talking with Kate Pickett, professor of epidemiology, research champion for justice and equality, deputy director of the Center for Future Health at the University of York in the United Kingdom. And she's the co-author with Richard Wilkinson of several books. The Spirit Level was absolutely brilliant. This most recent one just came out. It's called The Inner Level, How More Equal Societies Reduce Stress, Restore Sanity, and Improve Everyone's Well-Being.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Their website is equalitytrust.org.uk, and you can tweet Professor Pickett at Prof. K.E. Pickett. We'll be right back. And welcome back. We're talking to Kate Pickett, the professor of epidemiology and co-author of The Inner Level, the new book. Kate, or Professor Pickett, you were just talking about how you believed, and I believed for a long time that Reagan and Thatcher were, you know, in the thrall of the Chicago school and the Austrian school, you know, Hayek and whatnot. and actually believed that if they could increase inequality, if they could make the rich richer, somehow that would all translate down to average working people. In the 1880s in the United States, there was a fairly large body of I was going to say literature, it was more propaganda, promoting the idea of things like deregulation, tax cuts, et cetera, et cetera. And the theory was called the horse and sparrow theory. You can Google this. You probably already know about this. And what they said, what the wealthy people in the United States were saying in the era of 1880 to 1920 was because back then everybody had horses. Was the sparrows eat horse poop, right? They eat the undigested oats out of the horse poop and or horse dung. And if you feed more oats to the horses, more will pass through that they can't digest rapidly, and the sparrows will get fatter and be happier. And this was literally called the horse and sparrow theory, about why we need to be feeding the fat, the financially fat people in our society, or entities. And that was largely, that became actually a point of debate in during Teddy Roosevelt's presidency. He took that on. And then Franklin Roosevelt again. And everybody figured out that was just complete BS. And now we're back to it again. How does that happen?
How does that happen? I think it happens when we allow our policymaking to be captured by vested interests, and when we have a reduction in democracy. And people feeling that they can participate in policymaking. We shouldn't be making our social policy, our tax policy, our welfare policy on the basis of the vested interest of the top 1% or the very rich. We should be thinking about how we create societies that optimize well-being for the largest number of people. And I think that involves getting more people engaged in the political process and saying what it is they do need and what it is they do want. And I think also we need to stop trusting that those with vested interests have our best interests at heart, or indeed the best interests of the institutions they work in. In our new book, we've got a chart that shows if you look at shareholder return in large companies, you get the best shareholder return among those where the chief executives are paid less than average compared to those where they're paid more. So I think there's a certain amount of myth-busting that needs to go on about who it is who should be helping us think about the policies we need and the way our societies should be moving. And I think worldwide there is a growing movement towards thinking about alternative economic models, thinking about outcomes that we want that would be different to simply growth in GDP, gross domestic product, but instead growth in well-being.
Yeah.
So I think there is a movement towards this.
Yeah, the story out of Bhutan has certainly had an enduring kind of seductive quality. I don't know how true it is, but the National Happiness Index or Gross National Happiness Index. We're talking with Kate Pickett. The book, brand new book, The Inner Level: How More Equal Societies Reduce Stress, Restore Sanity, and Improve Everyone's Well-Being. We'll be right back. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or any place else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week: 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Back, we're talking with Kate Pickett, co-author of The Inner Level, a new book about inequality and equality. Kate, in the few minutes we have left here, maybe 3 or 4 minutes, how do we break this grip that massive inequality has seized us with? The last time this happened was the late 1920s, early 1930s in both your country and mine. And what broke that grip was a massive worldwide depression, followed by a war, and that kind of upended the entire economic and political order. What's it going to take this time?
I think what might be really key is that achieving greater equality is going to be a precondition to solving climate change. We are going to have to find ways to rein in consumerism and status consumption and get everybody to feel that they are working together towards a common goal. So the need to deal with climate change might be an impetus for us creating more equal societies. I think also this recognition that the pursuit of economic growth on its own doesn't produce high levels of population well-being and damages the environment is another reason for us to take tackling inequality seriously. But the hopeful thing that I would like to end with really is that there are a whole range of things that societies can do to improve their equality. It doesn't have to be redistribution, taxes and welfare. It can be through economic democracy and creating smaller income differences before tax. It doesn't matter which pathway you choose to greater equality. It just matters that you get there.
You're talking about things like co-ops versus the traditional corporate form?
Exactly. And it's a win-win situation because if you reduce inequality, you'll be improving human well-being and you'll be enabling that transition towards more green and sustainable economies that we're obviously going to have to make very, very soon.
But how do you break
I think
this?
This is a hopeful set of research ideas that provides an answer to some of the conundrums we find ourselves in.
I agree, and I totally support all those. But how do you? I mean, Jimmy Carter, former President Carter, on this program a couple of years ago said, right up. I mean, you can find it on YouTube. He said, the United States is no longer a democracy. We have become an oligarchy. And decision. I mean, this is the work that was done out of Columbia University a couple of years ago. The probability of the wishes of the average American getting economically getting passed into law are the same as random noise.
Yeah. I think the key here is education and our young people. And I think our young people, both here in the USA and in the UK, they give me hope. I think they are open-minded, they are progressive, they are creative. They know the world needs to change. And so I think if we can do a good job of educating them, then that will be the foundations for us seeing some real change. I mean, I don't know if you've heard, but we know that if, in the UK, if we took our Brexit vote again, we would get a different answer simply because more young people have crossed the voting age threshold.
Right.
So as our young people grow older, I think we will see changes, positive changes in the directions our societies are taking.
That's a hopeful thing. And I particularly want to tip my hat to you guys for the work you did looking at on a state-by-state comparison here in the United States a number of years ago. I've used that many, many times. It's just brilliant work.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Kate Pickett. The new book, along with Richard Wilkinson, is The Inner Level, How More Equal Societies Reduce Stress, Restore Sanity, and Improve Everyone's Well-Being. equalitytrust.org.uk. Thank you, Kate.
Thanks for having me. Thank you.
My pleasure. Great talking. We'll be back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Okay, we're going to get back to our conversation from the previous hour where we were discussing why is it that Donald Trump hates the American government so much? What's really going on here? Our book today is The 31-Day Food Revolution, Heal Your Body, Feel Great, and Transform Your World by Ocean Robbins, with a foreword by Joel Furman, MD. This is from the introduction. Let me call it like it is. We live in a toxic food culture. It's led us to epidemic rates of obesity, heart disease, cancer, type 2 diabetes, and Alzheimer's. Things have gotten so bad that most people think it's normal to have at least a few extra pounds around the middle, to depend on an ever-growing supply of prescription medications, and to lose a little more memory and mobility with every passing year. This may be typical, but it sure as heck doesn't have to be normal. Eating food is mandatory, but suffering from brain fog, living with ever-declining health, and feeling like crap are not. The fact is that right now, hundreds of millions of people are hurting from diseases that never ever needed to happen in the first place. Dangerous changes have been made to our food supply in just the last 25 years that impact how your food is grown and processed and how safe it is to eat. The status quo is driving small farmers out of business, forcing animals to live in deplorable conditions, and producing food that's making us sick. The medical industry and the processed food industry are earning trillions of dollars in a system that's devastating lives and threatening the very future of life on our planet. It's my mission to help put an end to this madness by sharing the truth about food and helping eaters put it into action. That's why I founded the 500,000-plus member Food Revolution Network, and it's why I wrote the book you now hold in your hands. In some ways, I might seem like a pretty unlikely food revolutionary. After all, in 1953, my grandfather, Irving Robbins, joined with his brother-in-law, Bert Baskin, to found the 31 Flavors ice cream company, Baskin-Robbins. In case anyone on the planet missed the memo, we're now pretty clear that ice cream is not a health food. But back in the 1950s, as my grandpa was pumping out delicious flavors by the dozen, not much was known about the connection between food and health. Up until then, most people seemed content with 3 flavors, vanilla, chocolate, and strawberry. My grandfather was a consummate entrepreneur, and he set his heart on offering consumers many more options, 31 to be exact, one for each day of the month. My dad, John, grew up with an ice cream cone-shaped swimming pool. Sometimes he even ate ice cream for breakfast. He was groomed from early childhood to one day run the family company. My dad's youthful innovations included Jamocha Almond Fudge, one of our company's most iconic flavors to this day, and the rollout to all the stores of the famous pink spoons that enabled customers to enjoy free samples. But in 1967, my grandpa's brother-in-law and business partner, Bert Baskin, became very ill. His doctors informed him he was dying of heart disease. I never knew my great-uncle Bert because he passed on a short time later, 6 years before I was born. But I do know that he was one of the greatest entrepreneurs in American history. He had tremendous wealth, a business he enjoyed, and a family he loved. And he ate a lot of ice cream. And in the end, he lost his life and his health at the age of 54. Grandpa Irv was faced with a choice. He could sell the company for a large sum of money, or he could keep the company in the business and take on my dad, then about to turn 20, as a business partner. Grandpa Irv chose to invite his son aboard. But my dad declined his father's invitation, walking away from Baskin-Robbins and from any access to or dependence on the family wealth. For him, it was a choice for integrity, and it's a choice I've always respected. My dad had seen ice cream bring smiles to a lot of people, but he also knew that unhealthy foods could fuel devastating consequences, and he didn't want to spend his life selling a product that might contribute to more people suffering and dying before their time. So he left a path that was practically paved with gold and ice cream to follow his own rocky road. My dad had suffered from polio as a child and grew up frequently fatigued and ill. In the 1960s, he fell in love with my mom in Berkeley, and the two of them set out on a healthy living path. They stopped eating processed foods, they gave up ice cream, and they based their diets on vegetables and whole natural foods. As my dad's health and energy returned, he and my mom moved to a remote little island off the coast of British Columbia, Canada, where they built a one-room log cabin, grew most of their own food, practiced yoga and meditation for several hours a day, and named their kid Ocean. They say that they almost named me Kale. I'm glad they took the more conservative route on this one. In any case, we did eat a lot of kale, along with cabbage, carrots, onions, broccoli, turnips, Swiss chard, and many other vegetables that my parents grew, plus brown rice, sprouts, buckwheat, and beans. For a treat, once in a blue moon, we'd have a few drops of organic blackstrap molasses. I think we went through about a bottle a year. Though my childhood diet was Spartan and my family lived on very little money, I grew up feeling rich in health. I became an accomplished distance runner, completing my first marathon at the age of 10. My dad went on to study the impact of food choices and to share what he was learning. His landmark bestsellers, including Diet for a New America, inspired millions of people and helped to galvanize the modern health food movement. The media was tickled by the notion of a would-be ice cream heir becoming a healthy eating spokesperson and called him the rebel without a cone and the prophet of nonprofit. Tens of thousands of people wrote my dad letters, often by hand, sharing how his work had changed, sometimes even saved their lives. One of the lives his work impacted, as fate would have it, was that of my own Grandpa Irv. Now, my grandpa had been pretty mad when my dad walked away from the ice cream company. He and my dad went years without speaking. But then something remarkable happened. In 1989, Grandpa Irv, then in his early 70s, was suffering from diabetes, heart disease, and weight problems. He'd always eaten the modern diet with a double scoop of ice cream on top. His cardiologist told him he didn't have long to live unless he changed his diet. And then the good doctor handed him a copy of my dad's book, the book 31-Day Food Revolution by Ocean Robbins.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I was sharing with you earlier the FBI Agents Association, FBIAA.org. They just issued this fairly lengthy report. I believe it's 70 pages, and they have, in their own words, these are quotes from actual FBI agents about the impact of the shutdown. These are all from agents. On the child exploitation side, as an undercover employee, I had to put pervs on standby. This just puts children in jeopardy. This is another FBI agent. In Indian country, agents work some of the most violent crimes at a very high caseload. The violations worked are primarily violent homicides and crimes against children. FBI offices are having investigations stalled to include delayed forensic interviews of child victims and delaying grand jury indictments on homicides and child sexual assault prosecutions. Here's another one. Well, that's all the. There's a bunch of them. This is drug and gang crime. I currently investigate a particularly violent street gang. I've had to tell our local law enforcement partners that I cannot assist in funding these operations because my field office doesn't have any money. This means that the victims of those crimes and their families will get no justice. This means that the one chance we have to take down several violent individuals may pass us by and we may not get the chance again. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. Meanwhile, WUSA 9, Channel 9 is I'm not sure it's Washington, D.C., is reporting January 25th. That's Friday of this week, is it not? Today's the 22nd? Yeah, if I'm doing my math right. Friday, thousands of FBI agents are on track to lose health benefits for the rest of the year. This isn't all of their health benefits. This is their supplemental health insurance, which covers vision and dental. It will lapse if the shutdown extends past 2 pay periods, and it will lapse for the rest of the year. Why are the oligarch billionaires who own the Republican Party and Donald Trump, why are they, and the Republicans in the United States Senate, why are they voting to give hundreds of millions of dollars to a Russian oligarch, but they will not hold a vote? Mitch McConnell refuses to hold a vote on whether to reopen the government and have our employees back to work, have our FBI agents, for example, back to work. Is it because they hate the idea of government itself? You know, David Koch ran for vice president of the Libertarian Party in 1980, basically on this, shut down everything, right? Just do away with it. Or is it because Trump is trying to shut down the FBI investigation? There's also a report that, and I haven't been able to verify this, but I've seen it in 3 places now, that on Friday the money for federal courts is running out, and that means that the Mueller grand jury is going to have to pause or stop. I'm waiting to see a confirmation of that in a major media source that could double check it. But is that why? I mean, why is it that these guys are doing this? Irene in Jacksonville, North Carolina. Hey, Irene, you're on the air. Irene? Okay, I'm going to put Irene on hold. Let's try Robert in Meridian, Texas. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Hello, Tom. I just want to ask, my main point was on the people that are affected by the government shutdown not getting paid.
Right.
Can you give a percentage, instead of 100 or 1,000 or 1 million? We understand percentages better. And another percentage which annoyed me, in the county I voted in November, 20% voted Democrat, and the rest voted Republican. Your thoughts, please?
I'm not sure what the question was, Robert.
Okay, the percentage of people affected by the government shutdown.
Right.
Can you give me a percentage?
Oh, well, we know that 800,000 people have been directly affected, and probably, the knock-on effect is probably 5 to 1 or 10 to 1. So it's probably, between 4 and 8 million people, because those people are not spending money in their communities. Those people are not supporting local businesses. Local businesses are experiencing a crisis. I mean, this is where it goes. Robert, thanks for the call. Charles in Opelika, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's up?
You at the road.
The road is winding. That's what the wind is.
No, I'm sorry, Charles. Mel in Kansas City, Missouri. Hey, Mel, what's up?
Hi, Tom. Yes, I just basically had the question. I guess all this morning you've been asking what the motivation is behind Trump not signing legislation to end the shuttered portions of the government, or the Senate not bringing anything to a vote. Does that does that affect what people should do that want to try to end this?
No, we need to be putting political pressure on Republicans in the United States Senate, and basically calling them up. The telephone number is 202-224-3121, and asking this very simple, very straightforward question: why is it that you will vote to transfer hundreds of millions of dollars to a Russian oligarch, but you will not hold a vote to reopen the United States government? And and literally, the guys who voted to support the Russian oligarch but refused to vote to support American workers are Mitch McConnell, Lindsey Graham, Mitt Romney, John Cornyn, Richard Burr, Ted Cruz, Ron Johnson, and John Thune. I mean, it's just right there. So that's what's going on, Mel. Mel, thanks a lot for the call. Peter in where are you, Peter? Layton, Utah. Hey, Peter, what's up?
You're listening to the Alex Jones.
No, I don't think so. Let's see here. Lori in Ocala, Florida. Hey, Lori, what's up?
Hey, Tom. Just wanted to say something about the citizens of the country, the taxpayers. We overwhelmingly voted for change in 2018, but we spent our whole life contributing to our commons, our school, police, fire, EPA, FDA, courts, etc. That is ours. That belongs to us. We're the taxpayers.
Okay.
So they're taking that away from us. So it's not just the 800,000 people that aren't getting paid. We paid for all of this our whole lives, and it belongs to all of us, not just some fossil fuel companies that I guess they opened up the EPA to let permitting go on.
Yeah, the Department of Interior, yes.
Yeah, and that is ludicrous to begin with, but we own this country, okay? And of course they want to take the country away from us. We've known that all along. We've made it rich, now they want to pillage it and make us all poor and take what we built. But this is ours. So we the people, it's like the Boston Tea Party. It's taxation without representation. Yeah. We're not getting our schools, our EPA. We're not getting our clean air. All these things that we voted for, we're not getting it. They know that. They know we voted them out.
Yeah.
So the only way they can hang on to it is, I think, an illegal takeover of our government. This is our government.
Yeah,
right?
and on top of that, Lori, the Republicans in the United States Senate, who control more than 50% of the Senate, represent fewer than 50% of America, and so they don't give a rat's ass about what's going on. Lori, thank you for the call. Very well said. Terry in Silver Springs, Nevada. Hey, Terry, what's up? Terry in Silver Springs? No, Terry. Barbara in Seattle. Hey, Barbara, what's up?
Well, I think Frank was partly right, because every single federal dollar goes to bombs. $700 billion.
Yeah, it's not every single federal dollar. It's about half of them.
No, it isn't. $500 billion a year for debt service. And you know what debt service is? That's $1 trillion, and that's all they collect in income taxes. And I think we had a few Democrats or a few people, populists, that, and going back to the Federalist Papers, that the federal government, the government that declares war, should never have a blank check.
Yeah.
And what happened is that we have had a blank check, and Harry Truman's grandson said the only thing that he ever really, his grandfather regretted, was the NSC.
Yeah. Well, Barbara, if your concern is the federal debt, I would point out that the last time we had a balanced budget was 2001. And that was a balanced budget that was put together by Bill Clinton. I agree. These are real issues. CW in Jonesville, North Carolina. Hey, CW, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom, and thank you so much for what you do. My comment is
you've talked about this before, the steps that authoritarians use to take absolute power. Is this not his attempt at the shock portion of those several steps?
Yeah, it may well be. Causing people to not trust the media any longer, having people not trust their own government. Yeah, absolutely. CW, I think you're onto something. Catherine in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Catherine, what's up?
Hi, Tom. I heard this parable from you in one of your podcasts that sums up inequality, income inequality, I think. May I say it?
Sure.
Okay, a fly and her eggs were windswept into the streets. One egg fell on a dead cat. The other egg fell in a dusty road. A week later, the two maggots were out walking and ran into each other. The maggot from the dusty road exclaimed, "You are so healthy, so robust. How did you do it?" The maggot from the dead cat yelled out, "Hard work and perseverance."
Okay, Catherine. I don't remember that, but I love it. That's great, and it's so emblematic. Amen. Thank you, Catherine. Paul in Arroyo Hondo. Hey, Paul, just a half a minute here. A quick one.
Yeah, quick one. Trump is successfully framing the national debate. Where's Maxine Waters and her subpoena power to get his taxes? Where's even Lindsey Graham? I mean, these guys know how to wield power. He's already talking about opening up investigations into Obama and Clinton again.
Right. That's all they've got.
The Democrats use their subpoena power to change the debate to criminality instead of
they will. Last week and the week before was basically the House of Representatives reassembling itself, deciding who's going to be on which committees, where they're going to meet, what their schedules are going to be, coming up with lists of potential witnesses, things that they want to investigate. That is all starting today. So, Paul, hang on. I think it's all coming. In fact, there's even there was one Democratic congressman. He's a freshman, so I'm not sure he has the actual power to do this, who's talking about investigating Kavanaugh for perjury before the Senate. Paul, thank you.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We're going to check in with Luke Vargas and talk media news in about 4 minutes and find out what's going on in the world today. It's 45 minutes past the hour. And welcome back. David in New York City. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Hi, Tom. First, I want to thank you for everything that you do. And I'm the first-time caller, so I may be a little bit jittery. 40 years ago, the GOP and Reagan began demonizing the word liberal.
Right.
And Democrats have been kind of stuck under that. I have an idea that I don't know what to do with that kind of may be able to do the same thing with the conservative, with the word conservative. And it's almost a whole marketing campaign, but I'm not even in marketing. So I really don't know on a big picture level, where does a regular citizen go with an idea that can streamline messaging that speaks to all Americans?
Well, you could write an op-ed and submit it to opednews.com. Rob Call does a really great job of putting up articles by first-time writers. You can call into a talk show and lay it out. I mean, you want to lay this out, David, or are you trying to be cagey and hold it close to the vest?
A real simple ideology of it for you. There's nothing conservative about what conservatives are doing.
Yeah, but the founding assumption of your statement is that the conservative means something of value.
Yeah. Okay.
So you're granting them credibility before. I mean, go ahead.
Yeah, I do get you, but what the idea here is not along the political spectrum. It's to reclaim the word as something that they're not doing, but then the Democratic Party is actually the one that does it.
Yeah.
Democrats will conserve America because Republicans won't.
No, I've heard that argument before, and once again, the problem is that it's basically asserting that conservative is a good thing. But I get where you're going with this, David, and I wish you the very best. Carolyn in Hemet, California. Hey, Carolyn, what's up?
Yes, I just want to tap to the conversation with three areas that convenient choices that the Trump administration seems to be making as to the pieces of government they like and think are essential. They're adding workers to the IRS. However, they're not going to open up any worker assistance centers so that people can get help with their
right, because they want us all to be frustrated and pissed off with the IRS, the Social Security Administration, Medicare. They break government and then crow about it.
And especially during this really complicated tax year.
Yeah.
They're not going to do any audits. However, they have opened up the area for key forms to be filled out for the mortgage industry. Then there's the Department of Interior selling off public lands.
What if, hey, Carolyn, it's conspiracy theory here. What if shutting down the government is their way of stopping the IRS from helping people figure out how badly they're being screwed by the Republican tax break? I'm serious. Yeah. It makes perfect sense. I mean, you just inspired that thought. I mean, what if, this is the time of year when people start doing their taxes and they start looking and going, oh, wait a minute, I got screwed by the GOP. Carolyn, thanks for the call. We'll see where all this goes. Luke Vargas with Talk Media News is up next. Stick around. We'll be right back. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, Ellen Ratner's new book. On the line with us, Luke Vargas, the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News, based out of New York City. You can hear Luke present a one world news story a day in just 2 minutes. Search Luke Vargas wherever you get your podcasts. Luke, Pence is sending out a video message to anti-government protesters in Venezuela today. For the last hour and a half, I've been asking the question, is Trump and the Republicans in the United States Senate, pushing and voting to give hundreds of millions of dollars to a Russian oligarch, but refusing to give a paycheck to 800,000 American workers, is this coming out of the libertarian billionaires' hatred and antipathy for all things government? Or is this, is the effort much more narrow bore? Is this simply Trump trying to shut down the FBI? And I guess on Friday, Mueller loses his grand jury because the federal courts will get shut down. Is it more narrow bore? And if it is this larger, we hate government in general philosophy that we've been hearing from libertarians ever since David Koch ran for president in 1980, or vice president, is that the thing that's animating Mike Pence in saying to the anti-government protesters in Venezuela, yeah, we hate government too?
I'm not sure I can tie it all back to the domestic political forces here in the United States, but I will say this message, if your listeners haven't had a chance to check it out, do it after the program, because it's less than 90 seconds from the vice president, and it is, I think, a pretty historic announcement he made today, backing up. I mean, Venezuela is clearly embroiled in a presidential crisis right now of the sort that even makes the crisis that country has been in over the last few years, kind of a slow burn, look kind of tame by comparison.
Right. Plus, they've got like 100,000% inflation rate or 10,000% inflation. I mean, they're just melting
the economic
down.
Stuff's a continual mess. The migration crisis out of that country looks to be worsening, and I could see it definitely worsening. But the political crisis, I think, has reached a peak. You had Nicolas Maduro inaugurated on the 10th of this month for another 6 years. Something that his opponents say is just unconstitutional. He didn't even win the vote, they allege, and it was not legitimate to begin with. And I think on top of that, you had a failed coup yesterday. Last week, you had the leader of the National Assembly, which is an elected legislative body in Venezuela that has since sort of been replaced by Nicolas Maduro. He created a separate legislature that is under his control in 2017. But this old one, which is filled with his opponents, is still acting. And they have declared a man named Juan Guaido as their president, the acting president of Venezuela. We didn't talk about this last week, but the White House now recognizes this man as the president of Venezuela, as does the Organization for American States, Brazil, Chile, Colombia. So there is almost like two presidents in this country right now. And so then enter Pence today, who says, "Hola, I'm Mike Pence." It's kind of funny. It's just kind of awkward to start, but he goes into it, and I mean, he really doesn't pull back. He says, look, the U.S. supports the people of Venezuela who are yearning for freedom. We're calling for a transitional government. Here's a quote: "Maduro is a dictator with no legitimate claim to power. He has never won the presidency in a free and fair election and has maintained his grip and power by usurping or imprisoning, rather, anyone who dares to oppose him," end quote. I mean, so the U.S. is throwing our weight behind the opposition here, which I'm really curious to speak to some folks in Venezuela and experts elsewhere to get a sense of whether they view this as useful public diplomacy or as almost fanning the flames. I mean, it bears repeating Maduro and his predecessor, Hugo Chavez, complained all the time about the fact that, the U.S. is ready to overthrow the government and invade the country. And sort of Pence's message so unsubtle in many ways. I wonder if it almost puts this opposition leader at risk. Hugo
Chavez repeatedly pointed out that Venezuela is one of the few countries in the world, actually, with large oil reserves, where the oil reserves are owned by the government rather than a private for-profit corporation on behalf of a billionaire class. And that the very wealthy, the billionaire class in Venezuela for years has been trying to take down this government because they want to privatize the oil industry there and make themselves worth hundreds of billions of dollars instead of just a few $1 billion. And that has been what is driving all this anti-socialism, anti-government stuff for years and years and years. Do you give any credibility to that claim?
Well, look, I think there's clearly state assets that a lot of moneyed interests would be excited to pick over in the event of a reshuffling of government. But I would say most of the reporting I've done on Venezuela makes it pretty clear that the vast wealth of that country is being squandered in the current government arrangement as well. It's not as if, we're taking the people are really enjoying the spoils of these resources. There's tremendous mismanagement and graft.
This is maladministration.
Favors, right, that are being handed around. And so, I don't know, but it is, given the fact that you had the failed coup yesterday, the U.S. is clearly backing the opposition leader. I would be worried for his safety and for his freedom. It's the kind of scenario where you could easily see after this message today, the U.S. seeming to give a thumbs up to these efforts to unseat the president. You could well have a charge against the opposition leader, say, hey, you're part of that U.S.-led coup attempt against him. I mean, it's not easy to draft this stuff up. So let's watch this carefully. But what a statement by Pence.
Yeah, amazing. I had no idea. Luke Vargas, Chief Foreign Correspondent at Talk Media News. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Tom. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. And you can follow Luke on Twitter at The Courier as well and check out his podcasts. We'll be back. Actually, hour 3. The worldwide debt scam revealed and who benefited. Stick around. It's going to get good. is The Women's Suffrage Movement, edited by Sally Roche Wagner. It is a collection of essays by a whole variety of people, from Gloria Steinem to onward. This is from the foreword. With the women's suffrage movement, Sally Roche Wagner has given us a unique gift: the real words and actions, writings and debates of white and black women who fought for over a century to gain an identity as free human beings and citizens. For most of those years, black women were legally owned as chattel, forced to work and to suffer the unique punishment of giving birth to children who were also enslaved. White women were not as restricted and endangered as African women or men, but as the daughters and wives of white men, they were also legal chattel with no right to leave their homes, disobey orders, profit from their own work, speak in public, have custody of their own children, own property without a guardian, or affect the patriarchal laws that governed their lives. Even many white men who fought against slavery supported this subordinate position of their wives and daughters. When Susan B. Anthony, an abolitionist and a suffragist, sheltered not only runaway slaves, but white wives escaping violent husbands, male abolitionist allies warned her that she was going too far. As Frederick Douglass, a freed slave abolitionist and suffragist himself, wrote in his autobiography, "When the true history of the anti-slavery cause shall be written, women will occupy a large space in its pages, for the cause of the slave has been peculiarly women's cause." And this despite the fact that many white women, especially not only in the South, aided and abetted black slavery and accepted their own subordinate position as natural. A century later, Gunnar Myrdal would explain in his landmark study of slavery that enslaved African women and men brought to these shores had been given the legal status of wives as the nearest and most natural analogy to the status of slaves. As he added, quote, "The parallel between women and Negroes is the deepest truth of American life, for together they form the unpaid or underpaid labor on which America runs," end quote. Wagner takes us into the rooms, writings, and discussions where white and black women and black men, all fighting for legal personhood and full citizenship, were both a miracle of shared purpose, despite all the lethal forces keeping them apart, and a tragedy of division that echoes in the need for intersectionality and inclusion in this day. Even the lynching of black men, crimes designed to maintain the racial order after the Civil War, was most often justified by proximity to white women, however imaginary or freely chosen. This tells us how dangerous and brave was the coalition for universal adult suffrage that you will read about here. It also reveals the betrayal when white men split the coalition apart by offering the vote to black men first, only to then limit their votes with poll taxes, impossible literacy tests, and violence. Yet despite this tragic division, and despite being labeled as varying degrees of non-human, this fractious rebellion and fragile coalition did eventually succeed in gaining citizenship for the majority of people in this country. Wagner brings us these imperfect and hopeful rebellions of the past as they happened, complete with divisions and debates, and a long organizational disagreement among suffragists about whether to seek the vote by federal amendment or state by state. She doesn't attempt to prove a thesis or to explain mistakes or to excuse destructive divisions. Other than the first and last chapters, each one with a very specific purpose, she doesn't insert herself at all. Instead, she allows us to witness the words and acts, dreams and disappointments, victories and defeats, visionary ideas and tactical errors of people fighting a battle that laid the basis for our continuing movement against hierarchies based on race and gender. It is this faithfulness to the past that allows us to learn lessons for changes in the present. In 30 years or so, this will no longer be a majority white country. It will better reflect the diversity that has always been its strength and its promise. Indeed, the first generation that is majority babies of color has already been born, and public opinion polls already show that the majority of Americans no longer support divisions by race or by gender. Yet there is also a lethal backlash from about a third of the country, including over half of white married women, among often those without a college education, who want to preserve their unearned place in the social and economic hierarchy. That's why these victories and defeats of the past become the best possible lessons and warnings for our present and future. By taking us into the rooms where history happened, Wagner allows us to see the parallels and differences, empathy and estrangements, connections and isolations that can hinder or help our goals now. Almost none of the people we will meet in these pages will live to celebrate the changes they are working for. This should tell us that social justice movements are not a temporary part of our lives. They are our lives. Most of the activists here were not sure that slavery would be abolished or that universal adult suffrage would ever succeed. This should give us humility about what we can predict and also arm us with faith and patience. Few guessed that the legal right to vote would come a half century later for white and black women than for black men, but would be mostly on paper. In the South, where most black Americans live, it would take another century plus an entire civil rights movement to overcome procedural and sometimes lethal barriers to voting. This should make us skeptical about changes that come from the top and that divide us more than empower us. And there are other lessons, and it continues, the women's suffrage movement. You know, here at the Thom Hartmann Program, we're creating basically 3 programs identically at the same time. We've got the normal commercial program. We have our television program that is carried by Free Speech TV, and we do fundraisers for Free Speech TV, and a small amount of that money comes back to us, which helps us provide that show to Free Speech TV. So that stream has its own revenue stream in it. And then we also provide a nonprofit radio show with no commercials in it that's completely nonprofit compliant to our Pacifica affiliates, to the stations all over the country, nonprofit stations. We pay for that one because we don't charge them by your support at Patreon. And in exchange for that, over on Patreon, you can get the full 3-hour show, archives of the show, and special clips like this amazing clip that we're just now putting up about 6 ways America is becoming a third world country. Check it out, patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this clip was useful to you, and thanks so much for supporting our program.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Today, well, maybe it wasn't today, it was a day or two ago, the former vice president of Nigeria, who had been banned from coming to the United States by law, George Bush in 2004, signed Presidential Proclamation 7750, banning people from the United States who had, quote, engaged in or benefited from corruption. And this guy, his name is Abu Bakr. His wife basically helped him bring $40 million into the United States. We know at least 1.7 million of that was bribes. And he's been trying to get back into the United States for years. And, you know, because his money is here and life here is better than in Nigeria. And so the guy goes out and he hires this lobbying firm, this Republican lobbying firm, and Republican lobbyist Brian Ballard, who, by the way, Raj Shah, the guy who was the deputy press secretary, the number 2 guy to Sarah Sanders, he has left the White House, and he's now working with Brian Ballard at this Republican lobbying firm. This corrupt Nigerian former vice president gives them $1.1 million, which leads to this headline. The former vice president of Nigeria was allowed entry into the United States after paying $1.1 million to a lobbying firm linked to the White House. And then it goes on to say, on Thursday, Abu Bakr checked into President Donald Trump's Washington, D.C. hotel. Really? I mean, does this surprise you or shock you? Or hello, swamp? I mean, this is really what's going on. And then on top of this, we've got now this worldwide debt crisis. And this is something that really we should all be paying very, very close attention to this. And you're going to start seeing a lot about this in the news stories. From today's Axios newsletter, last year, the world's debt, now keep in mind, the world GDP is around between 70 and 80 trillion dollars. That's the gross domestic product of the entire planet, around $80 trillion. Last year, the world's debt rose to $244 trillion, 318% of global GDP, which means that the principal business being done in the world is loaning money out at interest, which is pretty breathtaking when you think about it. The two areas that most contributed to this run-up of global debt were developed countries, the United States, the EU, Japan, all massively increasing their debt, and corporations in the developing world, principally India and China, who are growing like crazy right now and financing it with debt. But the rich countries, this is really concerning. The United States, well, here's the, typically what a wealthy country does is when the economy is good, you raise taxes, you increase revenues. Yes, it has a risk of slightly slowing down the economy, but that's the whole point. The economy's good. You raise taxes, increase revenues, sock money away for a rainy day. Well, Trump and the Republicans last year did the exact opposite 2 years ago. They instead increased spending and cut taxes and massively increased our debt. Now, that's stimulative. That gooses the economy, not in a healthy way. It's sort of like a sugar high, but that's what it does. But it's not just us doing it. The U.S. added close to $2 trillion in fiscal stimulus to our debt. That's just in stimulus, $2 trillion since Trump became president. The Eurozone has recently just ended a $2.5 trillion stimulus program. And Japan just approved an $860 billion budget in addition to $3.5 trillion in stimulus from the Bank of Japan. This led Christine Lagarde, who is the managing director of the International Monetary Fund, to say at the World Economic Forum in Davos, quote, "After 2 years of solid expansion, the world is growing more slowly than expected and risks are rising." This is something that we should all be very frankly concerned about. And where is the money going as the economy continues to grow based on this kind of stimulus? Well, the money is going to the people who are loaning the money, the very richest. By the numbers, this from the Axios newsletter again. Last year, 43 of the world's wealthiest people held assets, cash, real estate, things like that totaled as much as half the world's population. 43 individuals have as much wealth as half of the world's population last year. This year, it's down to 26 individuals. In the 10 years since the financial crisis, the number of billionaires has nearly doubled. Between 2017 and 2018, a new billionaire was created every 2 days. The wealth of the world's 2,200 billionaires rose by $2.5 billion a year last year. Big business and the super rich are, quote, fueling the inequality crisis by dodging taxes, driving down wages, and using their power, their economic and political power, to influence policy and politics. I mean, that's what's going on right now. And then you've got this guy in the White House who's like tweeting out, "Oh, it's mighty cold in Washington, D.C. Wouldn't be bad to have a little of that good old-fashioned global warming right now." Right, like it's freezing in D.C. I mean, they're having a huge cold snap right now. The reason for this is that global warming has distorted the jet stream. And so Arctic air is sliding down over the east coast of the United States. This has been happening for 4 or 5 years now. At first, it was big news. What the hell is going on? There's an Arctic cyclone or a cyclone bomb, or, we had all these phrases. Now it's just normal weather. But it's caused by global warming. Donald Trump apparently doesn't know that. Trump instead is saying, "I want my wall and I want it now. Give me $5.7 billion. Now, historically, and this is just an absolute great post over on Democratic Underground by Shishi2. Shishi2 writes, to Trump, "You can have your wall. No problem. Just do it the same way that Obama got Obamacare. Do it the same way that LBJ got Medicare. Do it the same way that FDR got Social Security. Did they hold the government hostage, say, I'm going to hold my breath until I turn blue, until you give me Social Security or Medicare? No. They authored legislation. It went to Congress. They held committee hearings on it. Amendments were proposed. They held studies to determine if it was going to work or not. There was a long debate in both the House and the Senate about whether this was good policy, how it would work out, what would happen. They held multiple votes. Obamacare, Social Security, Medicare. This is how all these things happened. And at the end, if you could convince everybody, hey, this is a good idea, then you got what you wanted. And they did. So why doesn't Donald Trump do that? Well, part of it could be that he's a narcissistic fool who doesn't understand how the government works. But I think a larger part of it is that he doesn't care. He doesn't really want the wall. That's not the goal here. I mean, yeah, the wall would make literally billions of dollars for an Israeli citizen who's a Russian oligarch who owns a steel company in Canada that's the only company in North America that makes the kind of steel that would be needed for Trump's wall. So you're shoveling more money off to, Russian residents. But I don't think that's also why Trump is doing this. I don't think it has anything to do with the wall. I think the wall is the PR stunt to call out to the white racist base and say, I'm trying to fight these brown people every single day. But I think really what he wanted was not the wall, it was the shutdown. He wanted the government shutdown. Now, he's getting all kinds of benefits out of this government shutdown. The FBI is being damaged. He hates the FBI. Our intelligence agencies are being damaged. Food stamps are running out. They just had to make the February payment because they ran out of money this week. The end of the week on Friday, the federal judiciary shuts down, which means Robert Mueller loses, in all probability, Robert Mueller loses his grand jury. I mean, you could just line all this stuff up. It's getting harder as Americans are starting to do their taxes now in January to get an early tax return. They're calling the IRS for help, saying, hey, I thought I could deduct my expenses associated with my little trucking business here. It turns out I can't. You guys screwed me. Well, they don't want anybody answering the phone at the IRS. It appears to me, this is the Koch brothers' fantasy being acted out. This is Grover Norquist's statement to Mara Liasson back in 2002 on NPR. I don't want to destroy the federal government. I just want to shrink it down to the size where I can drown it in the bathtub. Paraphrasing. Trump is doing that for these guys. He's doing what the billionaires want. He is proving that you don't need a federal government in order to have a country. Now, the question is this going to blow up in his face? Is it going to backfire? Is it going to cause Americans to say, what? Really? Is this going to be the thing that causes us suddenly to start paying attention to what they're doing over at Interior, to what they're doing at EPA, to what they're doing in all these basic, these federal departments that are slicing and dicing America and selling it off and giving it away to the billionaire class, to the damage that he's doing to Social Security by defunding Social Security, people who answer the phone when you call in. So now you've got to wait longer and longer and longer to enroll in Medicare or Social Security. Medicare gets more and more confusing. It's harder to navigate. Oh, yeah, well, just talk to AARP and United Healthcare, right? Privatize it. Next up, Social Security. We want to privatize that. Jamie Dimon on Wall Street's got a great idea for you. It sure looks to me like what's going on right now is a well thought out plan to devastate Trump's opponents in the federal government, the FBI in particular, but all, the people who work at the EPA, the people who work at the FDA, the people who work at USDA, the agencies that protect us. What oligarchs and billionaires call regulations, you and I call protections. Protections against being poisoned by E. coli, protections against being ripped off by drug companies, protections, against the oil refinery down the the next town over, cranking up the amount of pollution that they're pumping into the air that our kids are breathing. They call that regulation, and they say regulation's a terrible thing. We call those protections. And what Trump is able to do now, and Pence and the Republicans, and this I think is why these Republican senators will vote to give hundreds of millions of dollars to a Russian oligarch, but not one penny to U.S. workers, to federal employees. I think this is why. This is the libertarian dream being acted out right in front of us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
What do you think? Back with your calls right after this. And welcome back. Steve, watching Free Speech TV in Blacksburg, Virginia. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Oh, yes, Tom. It's great to talk to you again. I really think, I haven't really heard anybody mention, but I really think this shutdown is a showdown with Nancy Pelosi. I really think that Sean Hannity probably told Trump that, you know, if he shuts the government down over this border wall funding, then it'd be a good way to cause Nancy to concede to him.
It's not working.
Thereby, you know, showing that he is the leader in Washington, D.C.
Right.
He can't have anybody upending him, and so, you know, he has to have this shutdown, and he'll let it go on for 3 or 4 months. He doesn't care. But he knows that Nancy, being more empathetic than he is, well, he's completely lacking, but, you know, she can't allow this to go on for too much longer.
So you're thinking it's a variation on the old National Lampoon cover where they had this dog with a gun pointed to its head and it said, "Buy this magazine or we'll shoot the dog."
Yeah.
The Trump is saying, do you feel sorry enough for these federal workers that you're going to give me what I want, or do I pull the trigger?
He wants to create a win for him over Nancy to prove who's running this government.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, whether that's his primary motivation or whether that's a Benny, you know, a goodie that he gets on the back end as a secondary consequence, I don't know. But I think you make a good point, Steve. Thanks a lot for the call. Sean in Riverside, California. Hey, Sean, what's up?
Hey, thanks for having me on, Tom. I wanted to give you some big props, you know, on looking at the rise of fascism here in the United States. You're relating it possibly to even, you know, you say Trump's mentally ill, but I notice here you're a 4-time Project Censored award-winning New York Times best-selling author. So fascists using censorship, why would all the right-wing outlets be getting censored and taken off their platforms like Infowars.com when the left isn't getting deplatformed and censored? Explain that.
Actually, the left is, Sean. If you Alternate, for example, alternate.org is one of the really great progressive websites, and Google stopped spidering them. You know, a lot of my stuff gets published over on Alternate, and Google just like, we're not going to look at that anymore. So, you know, if you're concerned about, shall we say, First Amendment freedoms or whatever, it's happening all over the place. Melissa in Huachua, how do you say that city in Arizona, Melissa?
Huachuca.
Okay, Huachuca. What's up?
So I've been thinking about this shutdown since it started.
Mm-hmm.
At first I thought maybe it's just one of his usual distractions. You know, the Democrats swarmed the election, and therefore, you know, they're a threat to him. But then I started thinking, well, maybe it will be short-lived, because all these Republicans surely can't get behind this. They're going to worry about their own hides. And so, you know, of course they're not going to fall into line, but they have. And it's very disturbing to me that the Republicans aren't concerned about their own futures. What in the world would make them, you know, not consider that?
The fact that they know that they've got billionaires in their pocket who will literally spend hundreds of millions of dollars in an election to keep them in power. They're not concerned. And they've got media companies that own radio and television stations all across red state America who will not allow progressive voices on the air. So, you know, they're fat and happy. This is why John Thune, this is why Mitt Romney, why they would vote to give hundreds of millions of dollars to a Russian oligarch, but they would not vote to open the government. They don't care. Melissa, thank you for the call. You know, I hate to sound cynical, you know, or flippant, but I think it's right there in front of us. We'll be right back. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or any place else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week: 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans. What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Jeff in Clovis, California. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
Yes, thank you, Tom. I think you just sort of talked about this a minute ago, but I'm wondering if Trump really has found that the wall is an issue that he can use to continue his strategy of, really Russia's strategy to divide America. What may have started with Facebook as part of a plan to destabilize things and win the election is part of this plan to.
So you think it's a divide and conquer strategy by a foreign government?
Yeah, the wall's just a metaphor for dividing America, really.
Yeah.
And the GOP's got to be part of this because otherwise they could just end this today kind of by passing a bill and letting the president either sign it or veto it and then override any veto. So.
Yeah. And we know now that some of these Russian oligarchs are heavily funding not just Trump, but other Republicans as well, including Mitch McConnell. Or at least that's certainly seems to be the case. I mean, it's so much of this stuff has not come out because it's so hard to sort through, who owns which shell companies that are giving money to whom under what circumstances. But yeah, destroy the United States. I mean, this is the fundamental question. Why is Donald Trump trying to destroy the government of the United States? Is it that he believes the libertarian ideology that government is fundamentally bad and you should just let the billionaires run everything? Is it because he wants to destroy the FBI because they're coming after him? And he wants to stop Robert Mueller's grand jury, which will apparently stop on Friday when the federal judiciary system runs out of money. Is it that he just thinks that this is a great fight to have with Democrats and he wants to be the great guy who's fighting the battle? I don't know, but it's pretty damn shocking stuff. Beverly in McHenry, Illinois. Hey, Beverly. Got a minute to the break. A quick one.
Tom. Hi, Tom.
Hey. You're on the air, Beverly. Beverly? I think she cut herself off. John in Kansas City, Missouri. You got a quick one, John?
Yes, I do. Sort of going back to your previous caller who called in about using the word liberal. We should have never, ever gave that word up. Now, you know who Lee Atwater is. I admire the guy. Lee Atwater.
Yeah.
Okay, then. I admire the guy. I like the tactics, even though, and I wish the Democrats would use some of his tactics against the Republicans, not in the same thing that he was doing, but understand what he was doing, because they are still using that playbook today. Like, I would hang this Russian oligarch stuff on the Republicans like a weight.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm trying to do right now, John. John, thank you for the call. I think it is a weight. I mean, this is the question: is why is Mitt Romney, why is Lindsey Graham siding with Russian oligarchs instead of American workers? I don't know the answer.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's either some very petty personal thing, the Trump thing, or it's some large philosophical we hate government thing, or something else. Our book today is Kickback, Exposing the Global Corporate Bribery Network by David Montero. This is from the introduction. During Watergate, the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate President Nixon's alleged tampering with elections was intended to mark the close of a sordid chapter of American history. Instead, that effort, culminating in Nixon's resignation, would prove to be only the beginning of a deeper political morass that America could face for decades to come. Congressional investigations would uncover for the first time the multinational corporations, through kickbacks and bribes and slush funds, were not only secretly funding political organizations at home, such as Nixon's re-election campaign, but corrupting foreign officials abroad. This new perspective on the corporate abuse of power and its impact overseas would result in the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, FCPA, a groundbreaking legislation that, by prohibiting commercial bribery for the first time in history, sought to change how capitalism and political affairs were conducted around the world. Now, more than 40 years later, we are experiencing a kind of deja vu as a special counsel investigates whether a president allegedly abused his power, again by obstructing an inquiry into possible manipulation of our country's elections. Just as was the case in Watergate, whatever special counsel Robert Mueller uncovers will likely mark the beginning rather than the end of a reassessment of how power actually operates in this country. And just as in Watergate, there is the possibility that Mueller's far-reaching probe may reveal how tightly political corruption and corporate corruption are linked through bribery, just under the surface of American political life. Nixon was the recipient of secret corporate donations, which were considered illegal because they should have been disclosed. But the payments, while unlawful, did not compromise the presidential election itself. Mueller's Russian inquiry is directed at a potentially far more serious crime, whether Donald Trump, the head of a sprawling business empire, colluded with a foreign power to deliberately sway the American electorate, committing the very crime that the FCPA had been trying to eradicate since Watergate, the offer of a foreign bribe, a kickback. That law specifically states that a corporate bribe need not involve an actual exchange of money. An offer of anything of value, such as a promise to a foreign government official, is sufficient to violate its terms. This is precisely what Mueller is trying to ascertain, whether Trump, his company, his associates, or his family, or some combination of them, offered a promise to Russian government officials, a quid pro quo, that if they helped Trump by manipulating the elections, Trump, if victorious, would ease the sanctions on Russia. Doing so would allow greater U.S. investment in Russia and would benefit Russian officials and oligarchs, the Trump Business Organization, the corporate interests of the Trump's family, and former members of his senior staff, including Paul Manafort, his one-time campaign chairman, and Michael Flynn, his disgraced national security advisor. If the Trump Organization or anyone connected with it did make such a promise, and depending on how that promise was conveyed to Russian officials, the Justice Department would have strong grounds for pursuing an FCPA charge, among others. An FCPA violation is within Mueller's mandate to investigate, quote, any matters that arose or may arise directly from the investigation. As has been widely observed, Mueller has hired two former federal law enforcement officials with extensive experience in investigating fraud, money laundering, and overseas bribery. Andrew Weissman, who ran the Justice Department's fraud section, which enforces the FCPA, and Greg Andrus, who helped oversee FCPA policy in the criminal division. The drama playing out in Washington starkly highlights the fact that foreign corporate bribery can be a deeply misleading term. We've come to regard it, when we think of it at all, as something that unscrupulous companies do in distant countries, so that any impact has to be contained overseas. If a corporation pays big kickbacks to a greedy government official abroad, why should we be concerned? But in a highly interconnected world, bound together by a global market, a global financial system, and a constant migration of people, goods, and capital, corruption rarely stays out there. Bribes eventually harm Americans, American society, American values, and American interests, both domestically and around the world, in ways that are often difficult to gauge. Why do firms resort to bribery? The obvious reason is to gain an advantage over their competitors. But illicit payments also buy the illusion of growth in the short term, of increased market share and inflated firm value. It does not take into account the harm that this practice causes to companies themselves, sinking employee morale, diminished profit margins, and the possibility of hundreds of millions of dollars of fines and penalties. Not to mention a reputation that will be associated forever with corruption and deceit. The firms also effectively steal the public's money, because the majority of bribery cases involve a capital-intensive deployment in infrastructure projects, such as roads, dams, defense systems, oil extraction, or mining, that are publicly funded. To recoup the bribes involved in winning such contracts, companies conspire with foreign officials to inflate the costs, sometimes by tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars. While the companies and the officials win out, taxpayers are left shouldering the burden. Corporate bribes involve a remarkable amount of money. The World Bank has estimated $1 trillion a year, although this may represent the high end. Others have placed the amount at 10% of the $4 trillion spent annually on global public procurement. Bribery is not just a matter of money, however. It almost always involves power as well. The actual payments are the manifestation of a secretly collusive system that for most of modern history, corporations have been forging with foreign government officials around the globe. The book Kickback by David Montero.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Oh, this is very interesting. I'm going to like this tweet here from James Silverstone. Woman posts video of MAGA boys. These are the kids from Covington Catholic who were in Washington D.C. for the anti-abortion, deny women abortions rally and march, and then were harassing the Native American elder. Woman has posted video allegedly of the Covington Catholic boys harassing her and her friends before the incident with the Native Americans. These guys are really into their MAGA thing, Whew, amazing. Mark in Janesville, Wisconsin. Hey, Mark, what's on your mind?
Hey, Tom. Well, I think you pretty much answered all the questions as far as Trump and the Republicans. I mean, they use each other. Trump's worried about the Russian investigation. And the Republicans, they just want to advance their oligarchy, lower taxes, less regulation. They don't care about the workers. They basically could care if they drop dead.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all about making money. They're mostly narcissists and sociopaths. I believe that.
Yeah, I agree. Big Brother 5 over at DU posted a thing saying, "Time to quit calling it a shutdown. This is a lockout."
Yeah, they don't care. They don't care anymore about the poor white guy or middle class, the black guy or the LGBT. They don't care. It's all about the money.
Yeah, it's all about rich white guys. Got it.
Sure. Rich white guys. Thank you.
Yeah, Mark, well said. And thanks for listening to WADR there in Janesville. Steve in Bellingham, Washington. Hey, Steve, what's up?
Hey, Tom. I'm a big fan. I just wanted to tell you what you were saying before about how this whole shutdown is a libertarian dream. I totally agree. I've thought that for several days now. But to kind of put it in different words, though, the way I see this is kind of like the ultimate test right now of whether government is necessary or not. There's a lot more riding on this shutdown than I think most people realize. We're very close to losing democracy.
I think we've already largely lost democracy. We have elections being decided by and large based on which oligarch and which industry puts the most money behind which candidates. But the idea of losing our republic, a democratic republic, I think I'm guessing that's really what you're trying to say, Steve. We're on the edge of losing that. I think that's absolutely true.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes. Thank you for your work.
Thanks a lot, Steve. Good to hear from you. Jerry in Rochester, Washington. Hey, Jerry, what's up?
Yeah, Tom. Hey, I agree with you almost 100% about the oligarchs in this country getting together to, and I think the plan was hatched before the shutdown, okay? There's certain environmental pressures or certain, after the Democrats got the House, it's more pressure on these oligarchs. They got to make their move, and I think it may be even have gone international. Thanks.
Yeah, no, I think you're right, Jerry, and I think that you're seeing this kind of stuff happening in countries all over the world. Well said. Ken in Tierras, New Mexico. Am I saying that right, Ken?
Yes.
Hey, what's up?
Well, I have an idea that's a little different. I believe that Trump is actually setting up to do martial law. That's why he's so completely insistent on having the wall, because it'll keep us in. And also, I think that's why he did that phone thing where everybody got a call from him, so he could announce it, so everybody'd know they were under the thumb.
Oh, that's right, the emergency alert thing.
Yeah,
the presidential proclamation.
Yes,
Wonder if he's going to do that for a State of the Union.
That could be, but hopefully he won't have a State of the Union.
So here's the question, Ken. If the goal that Donald Trump is driving toward is martial law, why?
To take over the trust funds for the ones that they've been trying to raid, Social Security, Medicare, to try to make every single solitary thing for profit.
So this is basically on behalf of the billionaire class that Trump at least claims to be a member of.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Claims to be, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we all get it.
I don't believe he is.
This guy's a BS artist going way, way back. Ken, thanks. Thanks for your contribution to the dialogue. Ray in Seattle. Hey, Ray, what's up?
Not much, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure. What do you think?
Just a quick. Well, you mentioned earlier that the government shutdown is stripping us of all of our protections by cutting or shutting down the FDA, the TSA, and IRS, the judiciary. Is there a way to tie his security, the president's security detail, into this? A way to tie
the Secret Service agents who protect the president are not being paid right now, Ray. But they're still working, just like the FBI guys. In fact, the FBI reports that there have been virtually no sick-ins. These people, I think, when I have a friend, when we lived in Washington, D.C., a guy who worked with me on the TV show, who really, he was in the control room, really wanted to be an FBI agent. He had spent much of his life trying to become an FBI agent, and he just couldn't quite make it. But he was down at the FBI applying for jobs and this and that and the other thing. And what I really got is that, by the time somebody actually gets to be an FBI agent, they have put an enormous amount of their lives into that. It becomes part of their identity. So, which is a very different thing than, hey, I'm a clerk at the Department of Commerce, and I push paper. So I think it's going to take a lot more time for Donald Trump to destroy the morale at the FBI. But he's certainly trying. And I think the same is probably true of the Secret Service as well, that these are kind of high-status jobs as well as high level of commitment jobs. But don't put anything past Donald Trump. Ray, thanks for the call. Bob in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Oh, just want to key in here for just a sec. Power is destructive. Sustainability is what's going to save the planet, what's going to save the human race.
Yeah, Bob, I agree with you, but your phone is breaking up really badly. It's not going to work. You're going to have to call back, and we'll do it another time. Richard in Alamosa, Colorado. Hey, Richard, what's up?
Yes, thank you for taking my call, and you have wonderful people that answering your phones for you. You ought to
sure is great.
Raises.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm a social capitalist. We could have capitalism, but be a little kinder.
Yes.
I think if we spent a good solid percentage of our military budget and maybe employed the military to feed, clothe, and house the people of the world, we wouldn't need a military afterwards. Everybody would love us for it. If we legalized drugs and gave $1 billion of seeds, cannabis, poppy, and coca seeds to the Central American and South American countries that could produce cannabis.
I think they'd be better off with vegetable seeds, Richard. But I get what you're saying. That the Marshall Plan did more good for us, basically, than World War II. Well, I shouldn't say more good. I mean, taking out Hitler was a really, really important thing and a really big deal. But ultimately, if you don't win the hearts and minds of people, the difference between the way that World War II resolved and the way that taking down Saddam Hussein in Iraq or Gaddafi in Libya or the Taliban in Afghanistan, the difference in how those things resolved had to do with the Marshall Plan. It had to do with rebuilding, giving people something to, and our being, giving something to them to live for, and our being the ones who facilitated that. Is that the essence of what you're saying, Richard?
Exactly, and really ending this war on drugs is a key component to not needing a wall on the southern border. If you make the countries south of our nation more livable, then they won't want to come up here. I've worked with guys that spend 9 months away from their family to try and make a living in the United States in construction, and they hate being away from their family for that time. Yeah. These guys could, we could have reverse migration in this country if we made things more livable in Mexico, Honduras.
Well, that's happening, actually. Mexico's economy.
all the countries we've messed up.
Yeah, Mexico's economy has been improving, and now they've got a guy who's kind of like Bernie Sanders as their president, and they're putting their country back together. Migration from Mexico to the United States has been a negative number for a decade now. More Mexican citizens who have been living and working in the United States are leaving the United States to go back to Mexico than are Mexicans coming into the United States. The quote problem that Trump is trying to get us all to freak out about and hate these people about is people who are fleeing, as you point out, Richard, who are fleeing these repressive regimes and dysfunctional governments in Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador. In all three cases, governments that are screwed up because of what Reagan did back in the 80s with Iran-Contra. So spot on. I'm with you, Richard. Paul in Wheaton, Illinois. Hey, Paul, what's up? Paul, listening to WCPT?
Or Jimmy?
Oh, Jim, I'm sorry. Yes, Jim. I'm sorry, Jim.
No problem, no problem. Yes, Tom, everything that you said is, I believe, spot on, except for we're just missing the obvious. Like, why is he doing this? Well, I think we're giving Trump too much credit. He is not. He's a smart man in political theater, but he's not a smart guy. This is all he is owned. He's a wholly owned subsidiary of Putin. He owes them his entire livelihood since the late 80s. And you can funnel that into the top of the GOP, too. Why is Mitch McConnell silent? Why is Paul Ryan retiring? They've all accepted money from the NRA, which has been funneled, Russian oligarch money funneled through the NRA. They're all owned by the Russian oligarchs. Like, isn't that obvious? They all.
I think so. Or at least there's a certain high level of loyalty there. The question is this individual billionaire oligarchs in Russia, or is this the Russian government itself? I don't know the answer to that question. Or is there a way to distinguish between the two? Just like oligarchs in the United States, to what extent do they control the Republican Party? Pretty much. Jim, thanks for the call. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Why is Trump shutting down the government? We know it's not about a crisis on the border. There is no crisis. Why is he doing this? Back with you, Paul. Welcome back. Amazing stuff. Just amazing. Greg in Fairplay, Colorado. Hey, Greg, thanks for watching us on Facebook Live. What's up?
Hey, Tom. Tom, I've got a question for you. I'm getting more and more disappointed with media in general, but especially the mainstream media. I don't see where we get a full coverage of issues, and I know it has to do with the corporate owners putting parameters on even the liberal, quote-unquote, talk shows. And I wonder how we can get back to the media that I experienced growing up in the 60s and 70s. And I also would like to get a little insight into your experience with RT, because I didn't see any type of restrictions on you or Papantonio or King or Schultz. But, I hear in other outlets that RT is like a foreign...
yeah, but they are owned by the Russian government. And, when we did our show on RT, and it was also played on Free Speech TV and also on the internet, we had, by contract, absolute editorial independence, and I know Larry King does as well. I can't speak beyond that to anybody else there or anything else that's going on. And I haven't even watched the network since I left, so I just don't know what's going on now. Dennis in Valdosta, Georgia. Hey, Dennis, what's on your mind today?
Hey, hi, Tom. Long-time listener. Thank you so much for everything that you do. I think one of the things we have to remember is that Lindsey Graham came right out and said during the mock-up for the tax giveaway was that the donors were absolutely counting on them or something to that effect.
Yes.
But I also believe, well, in other words, Trump's already made his money. He's got his money. They sent the money.
I think not, Dennis. I think Trump is broke. I think he's underwater. Yeah. Which is why he's desperate to make $300 million building a Trump Tower in Moscow.
Well, it could very well be. I think also that this shutdown is in part because that's what he wants to run on. Even though the Democrats won the House, it absolutely proved to him that he needed to do a lot more and show a lot more about running for re-election. My sincere hope is that once the Democrats get sorted all out and who's going to be their nominee, that people come out. Yeah. And I think we need to do everything we can to get people registered and to get them out there and to vote Democratic.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And let's keep in mind, and in front of our foremind, in front of our minds, that it's not just Trump who shut down the government. In fact, Trump doesn't have the power to shut down the government. It was Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell is refusing to allow a vote in the United States Senate on a bill to fund the government, to turn the government back on again. It happens in the House and Senate. The House has already passed the legislation. It did it the day after Nancy Pelosi took the gavel. They passed that legislation. It's the exact same legislation that passed the Senate unanimously just a month ago, but it has to be re-voted in the Senate because it's a new Congress, and Mitch McConnell's refusing to hold that vote. He's the guy who's keeping the government shut down, not Trump, although Trump is very, very happy to take credit for it. Dennis, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. Those folks who support our program, who help essentially sponsor us on YouTube and on Patreon, have access to content, special content that is generally not available on YouTube or anyplace else. In exchange for supporting us at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann, you get the whole 3-hour show, a video podcast that's not available to the general public, that you can watch anytime you want for every single show every day, plus special content that is not available anywhere else. The rant this week, 200,000 Americans have died from overdoses involving prescription opioids since 1996. So the question, what do we do with a company and the individuals who own that company and run that company that has been directly or indirectly responsible for the deaths of over 100,000 Americans? What do we do? We've got a serious problem with an out-of-control pharmaceutical industry in the United States, and we need and product liability in general. We need to do something about it.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. Paul in Woodinville, Washington. Hey, Paul, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, Tom, to reiterate what you said in the break segment, which maybe people didn't hear, focus on the shutdown and focus on Mitch McConnell. At this point, I was thinking that every day Nancy Pelosi should say, Mr. President, open the government. But now I'm thinking she should say, Senator McConnell, open the government.
Yeah, Senator McConnell, hold a vote. Yeah, open the government. It requires much less explanation. You're absolutely right. And not just him, by the way. I mean,
only say no. See, when you say, and don't get distracted with, another caller was talking about subpoena power and all this. No, this is what they want, because then you get into a mud fight.
Right.
And this whole thing with the kids at the kids yesterday at the memorial. I don't think this should even be.
Oh, Trump is Paul. Trump just announced that he's inviting those Covington Catholic kids to the White House.
Oh, great! And guess what they're going to eat? McDonald's.
We'll see. He's got a couple of cooks who are working there actually.
Then they're going to do better than the national championship Clemson football team.
Right.
But to say open the government, then Mitch McConnell can only say no, and then the other only thing he can say is give us funding for the wall. So he's already out using language that I used 2 weeks ago, which is they are holding the country hostage. Now Mitch McConnell's saying, well, the Democrats are all the country hostage. Well, no. If he has to say, no, I'm not opening the government until you provide funding for the wall, then he's the one who's holding the nation hostage, and that's what he's doing. But to focus only on this, because it makes no sense to focus on anything else, because as you've said, this is essentially a lockout, and there's no point in talking about anything else. And as we go forward, there is a debt ceiling coming up in March.
Yep.
And then there's also another funding bill coming up, a big funding bill coming up in September. So we're not out of this. Is going to be a long hike through the woods.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Paul. Well said. Thank you for the call. Anita in San Antonio, Texas. Hey, Anita.
Oh, thanks for taking the call. My greatest concern about the government shutdown is, could this be just a massive attempt to destabilize the American economy and people and push us into bankruptcy?
Yeah, I think if that was what Trump really wanted to do, he would have waited until the last 6 months of his presidency. And then, when a Democrat becomes president in 2020, all the Republicans would be able to say, see, a Democrat became president, therefore. But I don't think that that's the case.
I don't know, because that's also part of Putin's playbook for destabilizing nations.
Yeah, it may well be. Anita, thank you for the call. We'll see. It is bankrupting America, but we'll see. Bob in Cape Coral, Florida. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind?
Hello, Tom. I was just sitting here wondering if you could give an opinion as to what the possibility of a military coup would look like in this country, and what would drive us to that ultimately?
I think a military coup is less likely in the United States than in many other countries because we have a civilian-controlled military. And, there's multiple checks and balances. The founders were very, very, very skitsy about the military having too much power. In fact, there was an open debate, just like a wide open debate during the Constitutional Convention in 1787 in Philadelphia, and then during all the ratifying conventions in 1789. A loud, strong debate about, we don't want a standing army even during times of peace, because as Jefferson said, standing armies are the cause of mischief. And he was talking about what you're talking about, military coups. They had seen this happen over and over again in Europe. And that's why Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says that the Army, not the Navy can be funded for decades at a time, but the Army, you have to every 2 years decide whether you're going to fund the Army for another 2 years. The funding of the United States, the Pentagon, the Defense Department, all of that goes to zero every 2 years. That's why that defense spending bill is such, quote, must-pass legislation. And that, is just an echo of the concern. So I think it's unlikely, Bob, but I wouldn't put anything past these guys. I think Trump has been trying to use the military as props. I think it's backfiring on him. Rudy in Bullhead City, Arizona. Hey, Rudy, you got the last minute of the show. What's up?
I love you, my friend. Putin wins. Why was there 5 meetings with Trump and Putin and there's no notes? And I'll tell you, out here, when I have to listen to right-wing radio, these people, they want to shoot Tom. They're ready for a civil war. They have enough guns. They just can't wait to start shooting, because we're not Americans. They call us the enemy, or socialist, or Marxist. It's pathetic, Tom. I love you. Great show, but
thank you, Rudy. Yeah, this is what you're looking at is the consequence of 40 years of right-wing billionaires, going back to the Powell memo in 1971, right-wing billionaires funding fundamentally anti-American literature, media outlets, think tanks, politicians, the whole bunch. And I say anti-American in that I think of America as America post-Franklin Roosevelt, and these guys want to take us back to an America pre-Franklin Roosevelt. No Social Security, no unions, no protections, no job security, no unemployment benefits, no safety regulations, the whole bit. That's their goal. And they've been right up front about it, by the way, to their credit, I suppose, for years and years and years. So we've got a big job ahead of us. Thanks so much for being with us today. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. And in the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. We can't rely on our politicians to do this. We need you and all your friends. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
From New York, I'm Luke Vargas with your World in 2 Minutes.
Bye.